Hey, you. This is my toast, my cheers to you for being bold, brave, and beautiful and stepping into the world of Houdini with me on this course. And I'm thirsty. With that out of the way, I want to give a little precursor to this course by talking just a bit about what this course aims to be, right? Houdini is a massive sandbox of unlimited potential, which is very daunting, right? Even for me at this stage, it's incredibly daunting. So what I want this course to be is a view of Houdini from the artist's perspective, right? Houdini is a very technical software. If you are a mathematician or some kind of whiz kid, there are certainly avenues for you to absolutely thrive inside of Houdini. But there are also avenues for those of us who are not talented in those ways. And I'm hoping to teach you Houdini from that perspective in particular. This course is going to be comprised of what I'm deeming a first day of school tour of the software. If you can think of Houdini as a tree, for example, we've got our base root of what the software is, but it branches off, right, into different categories. You've got particles, you've got smoke and pyro, you've got vellum, which is soft body, stuff like hair, sand particles, jiggly soft body, fat stuff, which I love, that kind of stuff. Crowds, you've got, character animation, all these different things. I don't know where you will shine, and maybe you don't either. Maybe you don't know what tickles your pickle, so to speak. But myself, as a generalist, I like to explore every single branch a little bit. But you may find, over the duration of this course, that you fall in love with a particular aspect. Those are the specialists of the world, and the specialists are often the ones who are making the absolute coolest stuff in their particular department. I like the flexibility of the generalist lifestyle. I will never be a master of any particular branch, but I'm okay with that because I like to make fun stuff for YouTube. It's not that big of a deal, right? It's not that serious. But for you, you may find something that you love. So that's why I want to give you guys a tour. Along that tour, we are going to learn a ton about the software, a ton about how the software thinks, and how you can find your own voice in that. That's one of the major things that I want to stress in this course. We are in a sandbox, okay? There are so many ways to do everything that you can think of, right? The way that I approach certain problems may not be the way that you want to approach certain problems. And I want you to know right out the gate that that is totally okay. In fact, it's encouraged, right? You can find your own voice inside of this software. So when I do something, you don't necessarily need to do it verbatim. Maybe as a first rep, it's a good idea. But don't feel the need to stick strictly to what I do, because you may find a better way of doing it. And then you can let me know, and that would be cool. Then we're kind of teaching each other. So the main focus of this course, above all else, tour aside, is to really delve into how Houdini thinks. It's very consistent. Through every single major branch, the same fundamentals are true, right? And this will make so much more sense as we actually dive into it. But this will be a project-based course. We'll be getting our hands dirty, actually doing the thing, right? Because I think that information is best retained when it's tethered to a very specific activity, right? If we struggle through something, the chances of us retaining the information gleaned from that experience is much higher than just hearing me waffle on, which I'm doing right now. So I'm going to wrap that up. But I just wanted to give you a precursor to this course to let you know that by the end of this course, my goal is for you that you will have a good overall understanding of what Houdini is. You'd be way more comfortable navigating the start of a project through the finish, the final render. And that from the minute that you finish this course, you will know where you want to go next. Because this is the beginning of the exploration. By the end of this, I hope that something really sparks your joy and will encourage you to continue down that particular branch. Or maybe you'll be like me and just dabble amongst all the different branches as a generalist. Who knows? But the only way to know is to try. So let's get into it. Now, on to a very fun topic. I say that sarcastically, but I genuinely do mean it, right? Learning how to learn, right? Teaching yourself how to retain information as well as possible, because you can basically just cruise through this entire course with great ease. You can just watch every video once and not do any of the assignments or any of the lessons as we go and just kind of try to retain it. All of it will disappear, right? I guarantee you, unless you have like a mega mind, which I'm very jealous of, chances are all of it will disappear, right? So there are different methods that I've used throughout the years to retain as much information as possible. I call them the 3 pillars, so to speak. And those are watching, teaching, and doing, right? And I want you guys, or at least I want to encourage you guys to follow me in that pursuit. for the duration of this course to see if it works for you. And feel free to change as we go, but I just want to give you an overview of what that is. The first step in that 3-step process, watching, is self-explanatory. You are watching the videos, right? Whether you need to watch it once, twice, 3 times, I'm known to watch videos multiple times through until I really understand the core concept of it. Watch the video as much as you need until you feel comfortable with the information. Number 2 is learn by teaching. And what I mean by this is honestly taking notes, but not taking notes verbatim as how I'm speaking. Taking notes in your own voice, right? Essentially, when I take notes, I'm kind of a maniac. So this is me validating you if you're the same way, but I speak to myself out loud, and I reteach the core concept in a way that I understand it. And oftentimes you will find when taking notes in this way that you may not understand an idea as well as you think you do, which pushes you back to step 1, watching the video again, right? Once you've taken notes in your own words, I move on to step 3. That's the actual doing. That's when I want you guys to follow along with what I'm doing. Like, do it as I'm doing it, and then feel free to branch off and try new things. Now, step 2 and step 3, completely interchangeable. If you want to do it, then teach yourself, having actually experienced it. That's great, but this is the way that I like to do it. Oftentimes when you are actually doing, that is when you realize how little you actually know. Even after you've taught yourself. So I'll go back, I'll change the notes, and then I'll go back and I'll do it again. Another important aspect in self-teaching is to structure your space a little bit, right? There's a lot of distraction. Maybe flip your phone over, right? Mute it. Turn off secondary monitors if you need to. Whatever helps you focus or lock in. Just keeping the world out as much as you possibly can, because the reality is when you are entering deep work, and a lot of what we are going to be doing is really considered deep work, it takes a moment for you to ramp back up to being optimal. To break that and then try to re-ramp back up into it. It's not an optimal way to work, and you will end up outputting less than optimal performance, right? Which, we want to be wise with our time at the end of the day. A way that you can do this without burning out, because I'm the king of the burnout here, at least until I started using the Pomodoro technique. The Pomodoro technique, if you haven't heard of it before, is basically a method for staying optimal, staying focused, one task at a time. You basically work for a set period of time, and then you take a break for a set period of time. If you look on YouTube, you look online, you will find a host of Pomodoro videos on YouTube, right? There's 30 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 30 minutes on, 5 minutes off. That's the cycle. I like to do 50 minutes on and 10 minutes off for 4 cycles, and then a 30-minute break. Go ahead and look into Pomodoro techniques, because they are a way to, again, ramp up into being optimal while still giving yourself the mental breaks that you really do need in order to not burn out, right? It's a very interesting balance when you're getting into Houdini. The next thing that I would stress would be to throw motivation away, right? It's a beautiful thing, and if it gets you excited and it gets you up and it gets you active, that's great. Like, use it when it's there. I shouldn't say throw it away. Use it when it's there. But base your entire work in this course off of discipline, right? Base it off of the idea that regardless of how you feel, how excited you are to be here or to be doing the particular thing that we're doing, that you are going to get up and you are going to do it anyway. Just give me 5 minutes of your time and see what happens when you get started, because more often than not, you will find that extra little boost inside yourself to keep going. And you may even get addicted like I did, right? So keep that in the back of your mind. Work off of discipline, not off of motivation, and you will go a lot further. And the last thing here is kindness to yourself, right? This is more of a mental health thing, which is important to talk about, especially in self-teaching, because it can very easily become a pit of loathing, right? You can be hyper-comparative, looking at what other people are doing, comparing yourself to them directly. Do not do that, okay? Just right out the gate. That's my biggest advice, I'd say. The only person you should be comparing yourself to is the you from yesterday. If you are better than that person, then congratulations, you've won the day, okay? So keep that in mind. Only compare to your past self, because that is the greatest barometer for progress that you can possibly use, okay? And we all operate on our own timetable, and we all have our own capacities. I call them superpowers and stupor-powers, right? I'm really good at some things, and I'm really bad at other things. I'm not going to compare, because guess what? Typically, as human beings, we only compare the negatives, right? So we all got those supers and stupors. We're all dealing with our own stuff. Be kind to yourself. There is one mantra that I've kept in mind from the beginning of my journey into Houdini. And honestly, understanding and absorbing this lesson is one of the biggest things that has kept me going. There is no end to this process. What you are embarking on, right? It's like a video game. The minute that you get to the end of a video game, it gets boring, right? When you get too powerful, you know, when you've beaten everything, you've explored, you've 100%ed it, it gets dull and you want to put it down. So the good news is there is no end to Houdini. The depth, the complexity, it's beautiful and it's vast and it's eternal. You can continue exploring this game until you die. You know, that's my game plan, at least. I don't know. But with that in mind, it becomes, you know, overwhelming. If you are driving yourself based on the idea of, I won't be satisfied until I've done it all, you're never going to be satisfied. And that's no way to live, right? My personal goal as a visual effects artist is to be able to do anything, make anything that comes to my mind. And I am working my way towards that goal, little by little, day after day. But make no mistake, this is the mantra to live by. The journey is the destination, right? Enjoy the moments that you are learning and progressing and changing, the little eureka moments that excite you. Lean into those things because those things are beautiful and exciting, and you should be proud when you're unlocking these different levels of skill set, okay? The journey is the destination. And if you can keep that mantra close, you will not run out of fuel because you are already achieving the dream in the moment. And that makes it even more special and more fun. And this is supposed to be fun, right? That's the idea. It won't always be, all right? So don't give up when it's not, but it's supposed to be fun. Okay, so before we actually go about installing Houdini itself, there is something you should know. There are lots of different versions of Houdini, right? And it gets a little bit confusing for people. So I want to at least look at it before we actually start installing the software itself. So we can maybe decide for you what it is that you should be using. If you head on over to sideeffects.com, navigate over to this Get dropdown, and click on Buy, it will take us to this screen. Now, there are three main versions that I'm going to be going over. It's Houdini Apprentice, Houdini Indie, and Houdini Effects. The first of those is Houdini Apprentice. Now, Houdini Apprentice is a completely free version of Houdini, which already you're going, hey, that sounds amazing. What could possibly be the downside of a free version of a software? Well, the only limitation that exists in this version is when you are either rendering out your final work or saving to disk in some way, right? There are watermarks associated with that. And that's basically side effects saying, hey, you can use the software, go ahead and get comfortable, but you dirty dog, don't you dare output something you could sell, right? It makes sense, it's logical. And I think it's really sweet of them to offer us essentially a full version of the software for free with just that little caveat. Now, the next version to look at is the indie version, right? This is the most commonplace amongst freelancers, so to speak. This is the full version of the software, and it is $269 a year. The caveat to this, though, is that you have to be making revenue under 100,000 US dollars a year. If you are making over 100,000 a year, though, there is, in the artist tab here, Houdini Effects. This, again, is the full unbridled, beast that is Houdini. Of course, much higher price tag, $4,495 instead. So this is more for studios, or again, if you're doing very well, this would be the option that you would go ahead and go with. Now, you may notice Houdini Core over here. In the text right here, we see it's designed for modelers, lighters, character riggers, animators, game artists. If you end up, over the duration of this course, finding out that these things interest you the most, that's fantastic because you can just use Houdini Core, which is, $2,000 is not cheap, but it's cheaper than $4,500, at least for the full version. And Houdini Core, basically the difference between that and FX is the FX part, right? You don't have access to those simulation tools to do those big dramatic, Hollywood simulations that you'd see. This is more the core tools that allow you to do, again, the lighting, the character rigging, etc., stuff like that. So I'm guessing you're probably going to go with Indie or Houdini Apprentice. Both are great options. It really depends on your need. One thing, though, because I hear you thinking it already, I'm in your head. You're thinking, I'll just get Houdini Apprentice, right? I'll do all my work in there. And then last minute, I'll buy Houdini Indie, and I will just render out all my final products. I know that because I thought that too, right? I got that dirty dog gene in me as well. But the reality is they're well aware of this. I mean, this software was designed by geniuses after all, okay? They know what's going on, right? They got a good sense of the pulse out there. So it's worth noting, if you create a Houdini Apprentice project, right, that is going to give you a different file extension to a Houdini Indie or a Houdini FX project. We'll look at that real quick. If you create a project in Houdini Apprentice and you save it, you will notice the extension on the end of that file is .hipnc. That's non-commercial, right? It has essentially been tagged as a Houdini Apprentice project. If you create one in Houdini Indie, you will get a .hip LC. That is limited commercial, right? Because of that $100,000 cap. And then if you have the full Houdini effects, you will get a .hip file. The granddaddy extension of them all, a real flex to the haters. You can open a higher version project in a lower version of Houdini. But the minute that you save it, it will save it as the lower version. The opposite is not true. You cannot open what started as a Houdini Apprentice project in a Houdini Indie structure without it then downgrading that project to be Houdini Apprentice. The same is true of even copying a single node from a lower version of the software, right? If I copy, and I've done this a million times, because I used to be on Houdini Indie and now at Corridor we're Houdini Effects, but I've taken old project files and I've copied a single node from Houdini Indie because it's useful, or a node structure from Houdini because it's useful, and pasted it into my Houdini Effects project, and it lets you know. It says, hey, look, you're copying something from a lower version of this software. This will downgrade your entire project to be that lower version. So I copy something from Houdini Indie into a .hip file. The next time I save that .hip file, guess what? It becomes a .hip LC or .hip NC, depending on what I copied from. So they're well aware of all these little tricks and whatnot, you know? And as a last little caveat, if you want to know more information about the differences between these softwares and the other ones that are listed here that you can see, you can head over to the Get dropdown and click Download, and scroll on down to this compare button. If you click that, you will get a full comprehensive list of all the different versions and what they offer versus what they don't, right? The file formats they can do, user interface information, and pricing. All the information you could possibly want when it comes to making the right decision for yourself. I don't know if you've installed it already, but if you haven't, well, go ahead and do that now, right? The process is very simple. You go to sideeffects.com/download. This will take you to this screen. Now, you will likely have to register, right? Do your thing. But once you are in the download section, you can either download the launcher, which is basically like a hub, so to speak, for where you can launch the actual software, or you can just directly download Houdini itself, right? There are things called production builds, and there are things called daily builds. Daily builds are exactly what they sound like. They are updated constantly, little bug fixes here and there, constantly churning them out, new update all the time. And the production builds are more of the major checkpoints for those builds, right? The daily builds eventually lead to a checkpoint of a production build, and then there's more daily builds in the production build. I typically stick with production builds specifically because some of the plugins that I use inside of Houdini only operate on production builds, or only generate a new version for production builds. So, you know, pick your poison there. I like to stick with production builds. And not too much changes between all these different iterations, so don't feel like you need to constantly update. I do it only as and when needed, really. But I like to do everything from the launcher. So go ahead, download the launcher, and we will go ahead and launch this. Install. Yes. Okay. Now, I've been made fun of so many times for using the launcher. Apparently, people don't use it, but I do. Because I'm a good guy, all right? It just feels cleaner to me, right, to use the launcher for installs. And I mean, really, it is the hub, like you'll see. You can use it for installing new versions. You can use it for actually launching the specific version that you want to. So you don't have to, type in the little search window in Windows that never seems to actually populate properly. All right, so we've got create start menu shortcut. No, thank you. No shortcuts necessary. Thank you so much. All right, all finished. So if you type in your little search section, launcher, Houdini launcher, hit enter on that, you will be greeted with the little Houdini launcher. Now, you will probably have absolutely nothing in here because you've installed no versions yet. So step one is going to be the login. You will be redirected to the license login. Go ahead and use your email and your password to get into there. But yeah, you can go ahead and click on the install, and then you can pick again production build or daily build. We go to production build. It'll install the most up-to-date production build for you. And yeah, let's take a look at what we got here. Houdini engine plugins. We don't have to worry about any of this right now, right? We're not going to be using any other softwares in this course. So I can leave all these unchecked. And as for these other ones, this is one that you will want to check, automatically install Side Effects Labs. We'll get into this a little bit later, but these are basically like nodes that are in the process of being finalized, but can still be very, very useful. It's like the test nodes that they're building in their little laboratory, I like to imagine. that's all good. So we'll just hit install, boom, confirm, just like that. So we'll go ahead and fast forward to when this is done, and then I want to show you guys how to install a couple more things. Again, we're not going to get into it right now, but I just kind of want to set the table a little bit with some additional tools that are very, very useful and very, very free. So there's really no excuse not to add them, right? We'll do that in the next video. Okay, so just like that, we have Houdini installed. Fantastic, super easy. So the next thing that I want to install here is called MOPS, right? MOPS is short for motion operators. It's basically an open source tool set for motion graphics and transformations. We don't need to go into that yet, but we are going to be using some of their tools. And again, it's open source, free to use, and super powerful, right? They're really, really helpful tool sets. So we want to go ahead and install that now. Go ahead and head on over to motionoperators.com. And once you're there, there's a little download now on GitHub. So we'll pop on over there. And we want to click this little green thing and say download zip. So we've got MOPS downloaded. That's fantastic. There are install instructions down here that you can read and try to make sense of. They're not too bad, but I'll just show you, figure that's easier. Head on over to your download section. Go ahead and unzip your MOPS master zip file. And this is where the magic lives, right? In this hierarchy. Installation is actually very simple. Basically, what you want to do, you want to copy your MOPS master file anywhere of your choosing, right? I have a designated spot for Houdini effects, specifically HDAs. That's what they're called, these kind of plugins and whatnot. And I pasted mine right here. You can see MOPS master, literally just copy pasted it. Once that's done, we go inside this and you will see a mops.json file. We want to poach this. So go ahead and cut that and head on over to your Houdini preferences. Now, your Houdini preferences can be found very easily on Windows. I'm sorry in advance, I'm not a Mac user. I don't know where it would be on Mac. But if you head on over to Documents, you can pop on over to Houdini 20. This is where we're going to be. And inside here is where all your magic will happen. So we have a packages folder here that we want to put this in. You may not have a packages folder. If you don't, very simply just create a new folder, call it packages, and hit enter. That's all you need to do. Now I'm going to get rid of this. I don't want this nonsense. Inside the packages folder, go ahead and paste the mops.json file. Pretend I did it. It was already in there. And then double click to open up the JSON file. You will be met with a little bit of gobbledygook, but it does make sense. It is basically saying, hey, when Houdini opens up, it will look at this document. And this document will say, this is where the MOPS files are stored, right? So right here where it says MOPS, and then has a directory, in between these quotation marks, definitely keep the quotation marks, in between them you want to paste the directory to your MOPS master folder. So in our case, once again, we head on over to Effects, Houdini, HDAs, MOPS master. I'm taking this, I am copying it, and I'm pasting it in the gap. And I'm hitting Control S to save that. Now, when Houdini launches, it knows exactly where these tools are, and it will load them in for us. As proof of that, go ahead and launch Houdini. I already had it launched. It doesn't launch that fast. It's quite a bit slower than that, so don't be frustrated. But where you see OBJ, click in this little box right here, hit Tab, type Geom. It will kind of auto-populate to geometry. You can hit Enter or just click on this to create it, and then double-click to go inside. Hit Tab again and type MOPS, and you will see all the MOPS tools right here. Do not worry about any of this yet. We are just installing. Okay, I promise you I will go over all of this in immense detail. If you see the MOPS tool set, then congratulations, you have installed it successfully. There is one more tool set that I do want to install before we continue. Some very, very handy tools. And again, it's free, baby. So, hey, shout out to everyone who makes free tools. You guys are freaking amazing. You're probably not taking this course, though, if you're coding free tools for Houdini. So, if you know them, tell them I say thanks. Anyway, let's install QLib next. Okay, so this next one is the QLib tool set. Have no idea what QLib stands for, genuinely, but they're amazing tools. So what you want to do, on Google, you want to search QLib Houdini Windows, boom. And you want to hit this GitHub pages website, QLib, right here. And just go ahead and click download latest version. Right, that'll start the download process. Now, this next step may seem very familiar because it's the exact same process, but I'll do it with you anyway because we're in this together now, you and I. So we've got our QLib master. Let's go ahead and extract that to QLib master. Inside here, oh, I got another master. Nice, we got some subfolders. So go ahead and just take this one. Take this QLib master fold and copy it in the same way that we copied the last one. Go ahead and put that wherever you want on your drive. I, again, have a little section for my Houdini HDAs. I will paste that right here. Ta-da. Now inside, there will be a QLib package for Windows. Once again, go ahead and Control X, cut that out, and let us head on over to the Documents section, Houdini 20, and inside Packages, we want to paste that QLib package. Once it's pasted, double click to open it up, make a little space here, and inside these quotation marks is where we want to tell it the path. So let's quickly go back. I don't know why I clicked away from that, but back in the effects, Houdini, HDAs, QLib master. Oh yeah, baby. Copy that path, paste that path, and Control S to save. And now, moment of truth. This time I really am opening it up live, so it's going to be a lot slower. I may even cut. Okay, we are back. So again, we click in the OBJ section. Just one click is fine. Hit Tab, type geom. That'll auto-populate. Hit Enter, and then click to place it. Double click to go inside. Hit Tab, and type in QLib. Or I guess it's QL in this one. Go ahead and type Frust. Yes, Camera Frustrum QL. Sweet. The fact that we have this node now means the toolset was successfully installed. Otherwise, this wouldn't show up at all, okay? So, that's that. Now, I know I just told you that this was the last one that we were going to install. And it is, I promise. But there is one more that I want to tell you about. Put it on your Christmas wish list, okay? It's fantastic. It's the greatest, okay? But it does cost money. All right, I just want to show it to you right now so you can pack it in the back of your mind and revisit later for when you are fully addicted to Houdini. Okay, as promised, here is origamidigital.com. It's called the OD Houdini Shelf Tools, right? It is $99.95. So don't feel like you need to pull the trigger right away. You may see me use some of these tools as we actually get into the nitty-gritty inside of Houdini. But this does all sorts of things. I mean, you can just look all the way down this list. This guy's incredible. These tools are super helpful. Let me give you an example of one of the most useful ones that I use all the time. The ability to highlight multiple texture maps, drag them onto Houdini, and have it turn into a material. Believe it or not, that is not default behavior for Houdini. Maybe they've changed it in 20. I haven't actually tested it because I've used OD tools forever. Point is, there are a lot of really handy-dandy tools inside of here that made it well worth the money, but don't feel the need to pull the trigger just yet. See how you feel as we get started in the software. I want to quickly take a look at navigation inside of Houdini, right? If we hold Alt and left mouse click, we rotate around the object, which is great. But the problem is the middle mouse button and the right mouse button, I think, are backwards by default, at least the way I typically like to work. Right now, in the default state, if you hold Alt and hold down middle mouse button, you can pan around the scene. And if you do the same, hold Alt and right mouse button, you zoom in and out. I want to switch those, right? I want the right mouse button to be my pan. And because I just use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out anyway. The same is true of this node view area, right? I've got this geometry node. If I left mouse click, I drag it around. If I hold Alt and right mouse right now, I zoom in and out. And if I hit Alt and middle mouse button, I pan around. So honestly, this one's completely optional. Well, it's all optional, isn't it? You're not currently being held hostage, I don't think. If so, don't watch this, call 911. But we can change that very simply just to revert it so that my brain is happy, and maybe yours is too. If you want to join me, we can do that right now. What we want to do, let's first of all close Houdini so that these updates will take effect. And let's open up our File Explorer here, head on over to the Documents section, Houdini 20, and this is what we want to touch right here, our houdini.env file. This is the environment file. Houdini will look at this every time it opens up. So take a moment to look at the syntax here. Syntax basically is like specifics of coding language, like the specific characters used, so to speak. What you can notice right away is that there's a lot of hashtags. Hashtags in an environment file in Houdini basically mean, hey, yo, don't run me as code, my G. Instead, just look at me as like a bit of text for the user to read, right? I'm not supposed to be run as code. Anything without a hashtag will be run as if it is supposed to be code when Houdini launches. So what we want to do is we want to add the command in here to say, hey, middle mouse button should not be equal to pan, right? We don't want that. Now in coding, we'll go into this in a lot more detail later, but in coding, there are true statements and false statements. True is 1, false is 0. So what we want to say is, hey, this middle mouse button, it being pan, yeah, that's equal to 0. That's not true. I don't want that to be true in my world. Now I've already got it copied here, but this is what you want to type. All uppercase, Houdini underscore middle mouse button underscore pan space equals space 0. Right? Again, just saying, Houdini, hey, the middle mouse button is a pan? Nah, that's not true. Control S to save that. Now, the next time that you launch Houdini, it will look at that environment file, just like it's doing with the mops and the qlib install, and it will make arrangements for us so that it can be the environment that we want it to be. That's the point of the environment file, is to curate the environment to your liking. Okay, so Houdini's back on. I'm going to create a sphere instead of just an empty geometry object here. I got a sphere. Now, if you hold Alt left mouse button, same thing. But if you hold right mouse button, now we've got the pan there. And we can use, again, the scroll wheel, the center scroll wheel to zoom in and out. I prefer that personally. But if you want to, you can hold it and then drag your mouse to zoom in and out. Same is true of the network view as well, right? The node view over here. If you hold Alt and right mouse button, now we can pan around. Zoom in and out of our network. And of course, drag our node around with just the left mouse button. Fun fact, if you hold Alt and left mouse button, you drag out a copy. Just a fun little fact for you. There's one more thing I want to show you here before we get into the actual course itself, right? Until we get into looking at that sweet user interface and getting comfy. If you go to sideeffects.com and you head over to the Get tab, what a greedy little word that is, Get. You can get your grubby little hands all over the content library right here. If we click on this, we will see that there are a whole host of HIP files that are readily available to us. A whole bunch of different assets and pre-made things that you can look through. And, you know, I don't recommend that you explore this yet. This is more for at the end of the course when you're ready to dabble and mess around and explore new things. Like, this stuff right now will just be overwhelming, and you'll be looking at a web of nodes that you can't make sense of. By the end of this course, you should be able to navigate all that stuff anyway. This is me showing you the restricted section of Hogwarts Library, and now I'm telling you, stay out. Now, you can go in if you want, but it'd be confusing, so maybe just, do that later. Quick video before we begin this next chapter into the UI of things. I want to let you guys know, I've just been doing a review pass of the edit as I've been, getting these videos ready for you. And in doing so, I have seen firsthand this next section, bit of an info dump. There's a lot of information, and it's your first exposure to this UI, so I want to let you know, take your time, all right? Don't sprint through these videos, try to watch them back to back to back. After each one, really do take your time and explore the concept and get some reps in this space. Because the better you can operate your tools, the more effectively and efficiently you'll be able to execute your creative vision. With that said, I also want to highlight that at this point in the course, I was using Houdini 20. We have now since upgraded to 20.5, and so when you see me operate things like the info panel and whatnot, mine will look different than yours. This is 20.5. This is what you will see on your end. It will look a little bit different on my end, so don't be shocked when you see that. There are a few visual differences in 20.5 compared to 20, but they make no impact whatsoever on the actual information or application of what we will be talking about. With that said, enjoy your first deep dive. I'm excited for you. Okay, so now we're into Houdini, right? And there's a lot going on in this interface, right? It's a little bit overwhelming at first. So I just want you to focus on these three main panes. We've got right here the scene view, We've got over here the network view. This is where all your nodes are going to live. And then over here, we've got the parameters. These parameters will be associated typically with anything that you are highlighting node-wise. So you highlight a node, you see the parameters there. And we'll go ahead and drop like a test geometry here just to explore it a little bit. If you hit Tab, click on the OBJ section, click on the network view section, hit Tab, and type sphere. Now, you'll see if you can actually navigate these with the arrow keys here, just up and down, but there is sphere polygons and sphere primitive. You'll see this a lot in Houdini, and we'll go into it more in the future, but just know that these are basically just different variations of the same thing. It's like kind of like a pre-setup for you. We want to work with polygons right now, so let's go ahead and just highlight this and hit Enter. Now you'll see it's still a gray little ghost box. It hasn't actualized yet. You have to click in order to drop that down. So we've got a sphere. Now, we've got something in the scene. That's great. Let's quickly go over navigation. Now, we went over this a little bit for the node view, but if you hold Alt and right mouse button, you pan. If you hold middle mouse button and Alt, you zoom, and you highlight if you left mouse button click. In the scene view, if you're hovering over this and you hold Alt, left mouse button will rotate around, middle mouse will zoom in and out. You can also scroll that in and out, and the right mouse button will pan, right? Those are the main ways of navigating inside of the scene view. You'll also see that once we had this created, we got some parameters to play with. Now, what have we got here? We've got translate, rotate, scale, pivot, translate, all those fun things that we want. Right out the gate, a very helpful thing to do is if you hover over any parameter box and you hold the middle mouse button, you will get this very interesting collection of numbers. As you can see, it's 0.1, 0.01, 0.001, 0.0001, and then it ascends 1, 10, 100. Basically, whatever you hover over here, when you scroll to the left or right, that's how much it moves incrementally. So if you want to move it a bunch, we'll do 1. You can see by sliding left and right, I go to 0.1, I'm moving it less. This is just some detailed control over how to navigate your parameters, right? You can also just double click and put in 0.1 or something like that. These parameters work for the full object. You can see we're scaling the X, Y, and the Z, where you won't see the rotation, maybe just a little bit. We're rotating there. Then we've got uniform scale as well. All of these parameters are controlling this overall object. But what is this object, right? We're looking at this object. You look at me and you see a person, right? Just a big old skin wrapper. But underneath that layer, that top layer, is what actually is making me, right? It's the internals that makes it all possible. You can actually go inside these nodes, just like you can go inside me, which hopefully no one does in my lifetime. If we double click this, we have now entered that geometry. And this is what is making it up. We can see there's a sphere node in here as well. And look, this has its own set of parameters. But inside of here, there can be anything. This is what comprises the overall object. So if I hit Tab and I type cube and hit Enter and then click it down, I now have a box. We'll go over these flags in a minute, but if you just click the little blue flag on the right, you can switch between what we're actually seeing. And then if we pop back up to the top by clicking this OBJ section of the network view, then we pop back up and we can see the box is now actualized because that is what is flagged as going on the inside. So it's this idea of contexts, right? And again, we'll go into that also in more detail. I just want to give a real top level overview of this understanding, right? So OBJ, the object level of your scene. This is the scene, like this is the most macro perspective of your scene. This is the top level where you'll have your sphere, and I'll type test geometry and navigate down to rubber toy and just click that too, just for the sake of this illustration. I'll move him back on the Z and I'll zoom out a little bit. But you know, we'll have our different geometries that are interacting, and then, you know, you may have a light in your scene, and you know, you'll have a camera in your scene that you're looking through. You'll have all of these things on this top level, this OBJ level. So we'll be here a lot, and we'll be organizing this a lot because this is the thing we have to really keep clean. But inside of these geometry nodes, this is where the objects get built. So if we hit Tab and type in merge, and combine both of these things and then hit that blue flag. Let's highlight the sphere and just scoot it back a little bit. You'll see that we have two things now that both appear and disappear when we type sphere. So you build the characters, you build everything inside of these geometry nodes. I hope I'm not over explaining, but obviously first time in Houdini, like these are important aspects, right, to keep in mind. So I just want to make sure I'm very clear with that. This is the OBJ level. And then if you double click, this is what's called the SOP context. You'll hear something op all the time, right? There's mop, top, vop, pop, SOP, DOP. You'll hear it all the time. I will explain what those are. But SOP is short for surface operator. This is where we operate on what eventually becomes the surface of our overall object, right? That's how I like to think of it. Also to show you that inside the surface operator level, right, the SOP context, there are different controls. If you look at the sphere, let's delete everything, highlight and just delete everything else but this. If we look at the controls on the OBJ level, now, real quick side note, you double click to go in, you click to go out, but you can also highlight something and press the I key to go in and the U key to go up one level. That's the way I like to think of it. You're going in one level or you're going up one level. So I, U, right? Maybe you prefer that. But if we go to the top level, right, the object level, and we look at the parameters here, we've got simple things, translate, rotate, scale, pivot, but nothing that we can use to actually change the shape of this object. If we go inside the SOP level, though, now all of a sudden, look, we see our wireframe better. We have a lot of controls over like the radius, kind of like we did on the top level, but these are different, right? The center of where it is, the radius, but there's also things like, look, rows and columns. This is where we can kind of add polygonal definition to our overall mesh. We can also change the primitive type to polygon or primitive, which was, again, remember one of those options on the top level where instead of there being polygons, there's really just one point in the middle of this thing, right? So it's simplified geometry. Lots of flexibility inside this level, but it's also where if I take a certain point and I want to do some transformations, I can do all that inside of here, right? I can totally change the shape of this thing in any way that I want. I can destroy it so that it's hideous to look at and go back up to the top level and go, hey, yeah, this is still my sphere, right? We can also add animation inside of that as well. So all of those things take place inside the SOP level. Now, don't worry if this isn't making total sense. It's okay. This entire section, actually, it's okay if it doesn't make total sense, right? We're just laying the foundation for what we're going to do later, and it'll all make sense as we go, I promise. So we've got this hideous deflated monstrosity. It's perfect. But we want to go ahead and navigate around it. Now, we did cover that a little bit, right? Holding Alt left mouse button, holding middle mouse button, holding Alt and right mouse button, you can do all the different things you want to do. But these are known as perspective views, right? They're the perspective, but sometimes we want orthographic views. You can think of an orthographic view almost as an infinite focal length, right? The longest lens in the world. Everything is completely flattened. There is no perspective. You know, if we get close to this, right, this portion feels closer than this feels because of the perspective of it. But if we hold space and 2, we get a top view that is orthographic, where everything is flattened, basically. It's a perfect top view of our scene. If we hold space and 2 again, now we get a view of the bottom. Now, note that you do have to click into the scene view in order for this to work. If you click in here and hit space 1, it's going to do something completely different. So this is context-based. Keep that in mind. So click over the scene view, hit space 1 to go to the perspective view, which again, we can navigate around. Hit spacebar 2 to go to the top. Hit spacebar 2 again to go to the bottom. You can pop back and forth between these. If you hit spacebar and 3, now you can go to the front or the back of your geometry. Take a nice good look at that. And if you hit spacebar and 4, it's right and left, right? So you got perspective view, top, bottom, front, back, and right and left. And you can actually see that right here, right? We're getting it right here. So we can just click this drop down as well, go to set view, and pick the one that we want. Now, what the heck is this? What is the UV viewport? Well, if you hold spacebar and hit 5, you will enter the UV viewport. If you know nothing about texturing, no worries at all. We will be going into detail on that. But this is where your UV lives, right? This is where we will edit our UV or specify our UV once it's set up. Now, this geometry doesn't have any UVs. If I hit Tab, UV texture, I got to go into it. What am I, a rookie or something? If I hit Tab and go UV texture, now we have the UVs. This may look like gobbledygook, and that's okay. But point is, holding spacebar on 5 will take you to the UV view, which is good to know. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very, very handy. Now, I mentioned earlier this blue flag, right? This is important. On this level, it's either on or off. That's the display flag, so to speak. So you either turn it on or turn it off. If you go inside of it, though, we've got more flags. And if you actually hover over the node, you'll see these icons appear around it, right? If you hover over it long enough, it'll actually give you some text to know what it is. Like if you see this one is bypass, this is node info, this one is lock, this one is template mode, and this one is display. These are the exact same as these buttons right here. You can kind of see them get highlighted when I hover over them, right? The blue flag, the primary flag, is the display flag. Whichever node has the blue flag checked is the one that we are going to see. We will see that. Let's turn this down. This is too ugly even for me. Let's turn that down. Okay, that's a little bit less ugly. But yeah, whatever the blue flag is on is the one that we are going to see, right? We do this one, we can see this. We do this one, we can see this. And in that way, you can navigate through the stages of your geometry, right? Very, very helpful. Now, another option is the template mode. It's the purple flag here. Since this is displayed already, the purple flag doesn't do anything. But if I click the purple flag on a different one, look, we get the wireframe version, right? The templated version of the next step in the process. So we can essentially get an overlay here. We can display one thing and we can get the overlay of the other, right? That's handy in many circumstances. If we create a box here, let's say we want to wireframe this next step, but we also want to wireframe something else. How do we do that? Well, if you hold Control and click on the purple flag, first it will turn a deep purple, and it will actually show the entirety of the object, right? If you hold Control and click it again, it'll go to wireframe mode. But now we have 2 wireframe modes active. You can activate, I think, as many purple flags as you want, which is really handy, right? Turning on as many as you want so you can visualize everything you need to in your scene all at the same time. But note that you can only have 1 deep purple flag active, right? That's a secondary, basically fully opaque piece of geometry. So we've got the purple flag, we've got the blue flag. Now, if you have multiple purple flags active, just be aware that by simply clicking, not with Control, just left clicking on any purple flag will set it to be the only one that's active, right? You can mess around with that. We've also got the lock button. I almost never use this button, right? We click this, it doesn't seem to work. I don't know why, but if we click the little frost icon, we can freeze that. It's like freezing your credit for you oldies out there who know what I'm talking about. Once you do it, making any changes at all will have no effect. Same too for anything that comes before it, right? Because Houdini's procedural. It works trickle-down style. If this is frozen, it doesn't matter what you change, nothing will be updated. This is a dangerous node, right? This is something to be aware of. Because if you have this toggled on and you make a bunch of changes and you don't know what's going on and you move on, when you eventually do and you uncheck it, let's say I make changes, I eventually unfreeze it, it's going to say this operation will discard the locked changes. I say okay. Boom, everything updates. All the mistakes I made in my past, come to the forefront, right? And we don't want that. We don't want that. So I almost never use this node, but know that it's there, right? If it's working for your workflow, then it's the right answer for you, and that's great. The other flag to be aware of is the bypass flag here. That is at the very end. I typically just click this arrow button. It's easier for me. But it basically says, hey, skip this node, right? So if we've got a node chain of events that's going through, we just toggle that to bypass that particular node. Helpful in a ton of different circumstances. You can also highlight the node and just press B instead, B for bypass, which is helpful. Now, the other flags too have shortcuts. If I highlight this and I hit R, that will put the display flag on it. If I hit E, that will put the templated flag on. So I can highlight this box, I can press E, this box, press E, and of course B as well. So, you know, it depends what kind of stuff you want to do. I don't typically use the shortcuts myself. I just click the flag. I'm old school like that. But either way, super handy, super helpful. And then the last one here is the information, right? Houdini is built on information. That's stuff that we will go super deep into as we move on in the process here. But by clicking on this node info button, you get a little pop-up right here. And this is basically the summation of what this node is, how it's comprised. You can see how many points are on the geometry. You can see how many primitives are on, how many vertices, how many polygons total. You can see the center of the object in world space. You can see the minimum and maximum position of the minimum and maximum point position of the object in world space. You can see its total size. You see all sorts of information as well as all the attributes that it has that we'll get into later, right? So this is very handy as well. If you click it, it pops up and it stays. You can also middle mouse button click and hold on the node in order to actualize that same information, right? If you don't want something permanent, you just want to check it out real quick. You just click and hold that. And that's great too. So yeah, one more time real quick. It's display flag, template flag, freeze flag, bypass, and then there, of course, is the information that you can toggle on as well. All super handy in different circumstances in Houdini. Okay, let's talk about selection, right? There's going to be a ton of this. Obviously, you've got to select what you want to edit if you're going to do any editing. So I have a little scene here. We've got a camera, we've got a light, and we've got a sphere. Let's dive into the sphere here, and let's click on this little arrow right here. This is our select tool. With this active, we can click and drag and select the pieces that comprise our geometry. Now, when I say pieces that comprise our geometry, what do I mean? Well, all geometry, if we open up our info here, and I'll click this little pin icon so it doesn't go away when I click away. We'll pin it to our screen. You can see that geometry is comprised typically of points, primitives, and vertices. Now, we do have this little blue polygons thing at the bottom here, but this just refers to the type of primitive that the geometry is made of. If we switch this from primitive polygon to primitive NURBS, a different type of surface, then we can see here, when we update this, that now we have one primitive, and it is a NURBS surface primitive. I'll switch this back to polygon. In fact, I'll switch this back to polygon mesh. I like that shape better. Polygon gives us triangles, and polygon mesh gives us quads instead. So I'll stick with quads. We'll refresh this, and we can see that this sphere is comprised of 266 points. Those are these things, you know, these big, beautiful blue dots. 288 primitives, which are these things, these faces, and 1,104 vertices, right? I can't remember where I heard this, but to me, it's the best definition of what makes up geometry. You can almost think of it like a tent. The points are the nails. The vertices are the little loops that link into the tarp, and the primitives are the tarp themselves. You can think of each primitive as an infinitely stretchable tarp. But at the end of the day, however far you stretch it, we have to pin it into a place in 3D space somewhere in order to make up a shape. So here we can see, first we've got our tarp right here stretched to 4 distinct corners. We've got our points, our nails that are pinned into the ground, so to speak, our position in 3D space. And we have the vertices that are the little loops that the tarp is hooked onto that are connecting the two together. The vertices we do not edit very much, at least I don't in my workflows. So we're not going to worry too much about that. We want to manipulate mainly the points and the primitives. The vertices come more into play when we're dealing with UVs, which is going to be down the line a little bit in this tutorial series. For now, let's just focus on the points and the primitives. Again, with that select tool active, which you can just press S to activate, press 2 on the keyboard, we can highlight our points. Press 3 on the keyboard, we can highlight our edges. Press 4 on the keyboard, we can highlight our faces. Now, there's multiple ways to activate that besides 2, 3, 4. Those are just the ways that I use. I like them a lot. But you can also click up here. Whenever you have a tool or something active, if this area above the scene view is populated, typically it is in a way you can think of it as the tool's parameters, ways to change the way that the tool operates. We'll be using stuff in there throughout the tutorial series, so you will get reps with that. But just know that these icons are there and they do change based on what you're doing in your scene. So we can select, here. We can also click and hold over here and choose, hey, I want to select points or edges or primitives, etc. There's also additional tool parameters in each of these. If you click and hold, you can kind of see there's a little arrow right to the bottom right of this icon. That indicates that by clicking and holding on it, it will reveal its parameters to you. So a good example for this is this area select visible geometry only. Now, also note, there's shortcuts for all of these on the right-hand side if shortcuts are set by default for Houdini. So if we click and hold this box, hover over the area select visible geometry only and let go, it will checkbox it. I pointed to the screen like you could see my finger, which is just an insane thing to do. But point is, it has checkboxed it, which means now that parameter is active in our tool. So if I go to click and drag and highlight, you will notice it only selected the visible geometry base drop. That's pretty cool, right? And if we hit Shift V to get rid of that, now when I do the same exact thing, it selected all the geometry. So these are little tool parameters that you can utilize to best navigate and select in your scene. Now, when it comes to selecting itself, let's say the box is not the ideal choice, Let's say something is very close to this object and we want to kind of, drag around and navigate a little bit nicer in the points or the primitives that we're selecting. I'm going to hit 2, switch back to point mode, and then if I click and hold on the arrow key, because we can see there's other options, this bottom right black arrow. If we click and hold on this, I'm going to choose lasso picking instead. Could have just pushed F3 if I wanted, but I'm going to let go on lasso picking, and now round them up. Or I can brush select instead. Lots of different options. You'll also see, look, area select visible geometry only's here as well. This is what I was saying earlier, where in Houdini, there's so many different ways to do these things. Like, there's different ways to access these tools. There is no right or wrong answer. It's more just getting comfortable in the options that you have and finding what's best for you. Now, let's say click and drag is not the way that I want to select these things. Let's say I want to select this face and this face. Well, if I hold Shift and click, I can add additional faces or points or edges to my selection. If I Control and click, I can get rid of those from the selection. I can also click and drag with Shift to add additional things. If you don't hold Shift, it will replace your selection every single time. So Shift is how you additively add to your selection, and Control is how you can remove from that selection. Another handy thing is selecting lines of polygons, right? A lot of the times if our topology is clean, we may want to select a clean streak of polygons for whatever reason. If you click, hold Shift and A at the same time, that's essentially, if you think about it, A is short for all. So if you're holding Shift, you say, I want to add, while holding A down as well as saying, I want to add all the polygons between that first selection and this next one. You then left mouse button click, and congratulations, you've got a row. But if you click, hold Shift and A, and middle mouse button instead, it will select a loop, right? I won't go into too many more of these because I don't want to overwhelm you with them, but those two in particular, Shift and A, and click, and Shift and A, and middle mouse button click are very, very handy. So they're good to kind of put in the back of your mind. There's also helpful things like holding Shift and G to grow, or Shift and S to shrink. Right? G for grow, S for shrink. Most of the shortcuts in Houdini are pretty well thought out, I think. And then the last one that I'll give you here, if you hold Shift and A, middle mouse button click, we've got another loop now. If I hold Shift and H, this is the flood fill. You can actually see here at the bottom while I'm holding it. Look, hold A to select full, middle mouse button on partial, left middle mouse button on loops, like we talked about, or hold H to select by flood fill. That basically just says, this is actually a better example. I'll highlight this, and I'll highlight this. And by holding Shift and H now, we are going to flood fill everything between the two selections. So in this way, you're essentially coloring in the edges of your object and then fill selecting the center of that, right? Now, I know I'm going into a lot of detail, so don't stress yourself out over memorizing all of this, and I may make this reminder a few more times. This is more just so you know some of the capabilities that we will be tapping into in the future, so they don't take you by surprise. We have gone over selection. That's great. Pocket that away in the back of your brain. Now let's go over moving things, transformation, right? That all takes place utilizing this right here. It's called the show handle. I call it the transform tool. I don't actually know if that's the actual name for it, but I do use it all the time. So if I ever say the transformation tool, this is what I mean. In select mode, we can pick whatever we want. Now we can move things in the parameters window here. We can rotate them, scale them, as we looked at before in an earlier lesson here. But what if we want to do that in a more interactive way? We want to do that on screen. Well, by clicking the show handle, it is going to, believe it or not, show us the handle. You know, you can move on all the different axes, the X, the Z, the Y. You can, move it two at a time. You can move it all three. You can rotate. You can drag one of these up top and rotate on two different axes, like all the different transformations you'd hope to see that just make for a much more interactive experience. Now, quick side note. This underneath here, this section of magnets, these are the snapping tools. I'm not going to go into them too much. Just be aware, make sure this is not on, because what you'll get is a very strange situation where it's trying to snap it to the ground plane when you're moving it around your scene, right? Which gets for weird results, right? It's trying to snap it. It's causing all sorts of problems. So if you're having like weird glitchy issues dragging it around, it's probably some of the snapping tools that are active, although I don't believe they're active by default, so you may be fine. These are the same transformations, by the way, that you're seing in your parameters, so it just depends how you want to do it. Calling it the handle node is a little disingenuous, even though that's its legal name, it's its birth name, because the handle tool is very important. You are basically going to live between the select tool or the handle tool. The handle tool needs to be active in order to use any sort of interactivity with any node, right? Without it being on, you will not see the important things, essentially the handles, I guess, that you need to interact with in order to make changes, right? I'll give you an example of that makes a little more sense. If we go into the sphere here, the sphere by default, you can see there's a box around it. If we're in select mode, we're selecting our points, we're selecting our faces, etc. If we're in transform mode, we've got our handles, which we might expect, but we also see this bounding box. You see, each node that we create is designed differently. At the end of the day, each node is basically just a collection of code that's been built up with a nice wrapper on it for us to access. The creators of these nodes have designed tools that are interactive for us in the viewport. Those tools are only visible if the handle tool is active. If you are in select mode, take this for example. The sphere node by default gives you interactivity not only to rotate it and transform it, but it also wants you to be able to scale it in different ways, holding shift to scale both sides, top and bottom, If you want to make these scale changes, but you have the select tool active, you can't do that. There's no way. In order to see the tools that are accessible in this node, you must have the handle active. So to further illustrate this point, let's create a different type of node entirely. We're going to hit tab and type in clip. If we shift enter, it will create it and attach it to the node we had highlighted earlier. The clip works, well, exactly as advertised. It clips the geometry, right? It starts by default clipping on the y-axis, anything that is below. Which you can see in the parameters here. It says keep primitives above the plane, and then it shows you the plane. If we're in select mode, though, you're not seeing anything, right? You have no access to the tools that the designers of the clip node built in for you to access and work with. So if you ever don't see the tools and you have the node selected, you're going, what the heck is going on? It's because the handle tool is not selected. The minute that you hit the show handle tool, now you have access to what they designed. You'll notice the handle on this is not the handle that you see in the sphere node, right? If we highlight the sphere node, we've got a traditional handle. We've got the rotation, the positional shifts. Now, we do have this box, which is not traditional, but this is also, in a way, a handle. It's the custom handle for this node in order to interact with it and make changes as you want to change it. So we see in this scene view window, now we see this ground plane visualizer and this that we can use to rotate, or we can use to drag it up. We can make changes interactively. We can also make changes, obviously, in here, but this is more interactive. This is more artist-friendly, so to speak. You'll also occasionally get pop-ups on screen, like we can see clip distance here, that we can click and drag as well. More interactivity. So we've got interactivity in the viewport. Now, let's hit tab and type in UV flatten. Don't worry about this node at all, but drop that down. And look, with the select tool active, you are again able to select geometries you might expect. With the handle tool active, it changes the entire interface. Because again, this is what the designers of this node want to set up for you in order to interact and interface with this particular node. You've got to change to the actual interface itself, but you've also got additional parameter tools above the scene view, right? These disappear when I switch between nodes. Now, speaking of handles, we've got our handle tool active. We want to make changes. We've got the big handle here, but what if we only want to make changes to the translation, or just to the rotation, or just to the scale? Let's say this is a bit finicky and we don't like to deal with that. If we hit T as a shortcut, that will give us our translation handle. R will give us our rotation handle by itself, and E will give us our scale handle by itself, which is maybe just a little nicer to interface with. Just remember that. E for scale, R for rotation, and T for translation. So we've covered selection, we've covered transformation. We haven't really talked too much about creating nodes, right? I've shown you the tab approach, but there are many other ways to do that same thing. But first, a little bit of context here. Context being literally the perfect word, because there are lots of different contexts in Houdini. And what I mean by that is the OBJ level is different than the SOP level, as we've talked about, right? Surface operation, that's where we do all our things to build our object. And then the object level is where we kind of set our scene and our light and our camera and all that good stuff. Different contexts exist as organizational boxes for different activities, right? We've only covered two so far, the object level and the SOP level. But one important thing to note is that the context dictates what nodes are available, because nodes are designed to work on different things. And in order to work on those specific things, they have to be in that specific environment. So, for example, if you click on the network view while in the OBJ level and you hit tab, you will get a list of all the different subcategories of nodes that exist inside of this context. Now you'll notice there's a lot, but not that many, right? You'd expect to see more than this. Well, that's because these are only the nodes that work on this level, in this context. If you create a geometry node, this is going to be an empty shell, and we double click to go inside of it, and then you hit tab in there. Well, now look, we've got whole new worlds of nodes and possibilities, all of these designed to work on the surface, essentially, of the object. Now, just so it's covered, there are plenty of different contexts. If you click and hold on this little icon by the OBJ here, you will actually see that there's lots of different contexts. And each of these will take you into its own little world, inside of which there are new, unique nodes to use. We will eventually traverse the majority of these. But for now, we're going to stick to the OBJ level and a subset of the OBJ level, which is the SOP level, right? Let's highlight and delete the sphere. And let's say we don't want to hit the tab method in order to create it. We want something different. Well, up at the top left, there is what's called the Create tab. And here we'll find, oh look, a sphere. If we click on this, now in our interface, we have a more interactive way to create a sphere. By clicking sphere, it still hasn't created the actual sphere yet. We can pick where in the world that should be. If we hover over here and click, it will realize it in that location in 3D space. If we want it in the middle, we can click and just hit enter, and it will create it at the exact center of our world, what's known as world space, the 0, 0, 0 of our world, X, Y, Z, 0. I'm done saying 0 now. Point is, we've got our sphere, and the internals are the exact same, right? So if we hop back up here, we can see it has created our sphere. There's also another way. If you click on the scene view, again, just a reminder for the names here, we can see scene view on the top left of this tab. So this is how we know this is the scene view. But if we click on the scene view and hit C, essentially create, it will open up a radial menu that we can use in order to create a sphere. Now here we've got a lot of different options for a lot of different use cases, but I know we want to create geometry and we want to create a sphere. So we click and look, we're right where we left off. If we hit enter, we've created it at the center of our world again. So there is the tab method, there is the shelf method, and there is the radial pop-up method. Now it is worth noting, you know, we're dealing in creating geometry, but this is really more about creating nodes than it is creating geometry as we know it. Because if we explore this top shelf area, there's lots of stuff going on. Look, we can create box, sphere, tube. We can create a null, line, spray paint, so many different things. If we move over to the modify tool, which is, believe it or not, for modifying geometry, well, look, we've got very helpful nodes like a duplicate node or a copy to points node that we'll look at later. A delete node. We can affect the model directly if you want to sweep along a curve or you want to scatter onto geometry, you know? All of these tabs contain different tools that are the exact same tools that you can create if you are in the right context, hitting tab and typing it in. This is more for, if you can't remember the name of something, this tool is here with helpful icons that will help you. I personally do not use this very often, but I want you guys to know this is here in case you need it, right? There's also this little plus icon at the bottom. These are the shelves that are not shown by default. But for example, I have a Grayscale Gorilla tool installed that I like to access every once in a while. So if I click this, it's going to actualize that shelf tab for me. So in this way, I can customize my own shelf to be more useful to me. Now, since we're already in the attic exploring the shelves, why don't we mosey on to the right? This is what I call the danger zone over here. A lot of these tabs contain final results. If we click flip fluid from object in this tab, in the particle fluids tab, nothing happens. But what we do get in the scene view at the bottom here in blue text, an option to select object to convert into a flip fluid. Press enter to accept the selection. So we can now pick our object. I'll click on this sphere and it says to hit enter. Okay, I'll hit enter. And what it does is creates an entire series of nodes. It creates an entire setup to create flip fluids. So the final thing that we get, I'm going to turn off the grid here for visibility, but the final thing that we get is, look, it's a simulation of particles, right? It has set up all these nodes for us and these systems for us in order to create a flip fluid simulation. Now, on the surface, that sounds great, right? It's like, oh, yeah, shortcut. Get it out of your brain. I want to show you the gun safe so I can lock it in front of you and say, you are not allowed in there yet. You're too young, all right? Too young for the gun. We are going to unlock this section at the very end of the tutorial series. The reality is, you should know how the sausage gets made, okay? So every branch of Houdini that we explore, I want you to understand the fundamental building blocks that go into that specific thing before you touch the shelf tools. The shelf tools really are useful when you are able to dive in and explore how these things are constructed. Because at that point, you will already have the knowledge you need to make the tweaks necessary to actually make a useful system. Right out the gate, you are not going to know what does what, and it's all going to be overwhelming and ugly and lonely. Speaking from experience, by the way. So I want to make sure you are trained up before entering this area of the dojo. For me, I like to keep it simple. I don't use the radial menu. I don't use the shelf tools. I just hit tab and I type what I want, or God forbid if I forget, I do venture up into the shelves to the area and I find something that will jog my memory. Besides that, I tend to stay away from the shelf tool area. I just want you to know that that's there. So let's talk a little bit about the viewport itself, right? This big, beautiful box right here, the scene view. What we are looking at right now, we've just got a sphere in the scene, very basic. But the way that it's visibly displayed isn't really showing us much about the object, which, you know, is perfect for us in certain circumstances, but in other circumstances, it'd be nice to see a little more. And so what we have here in the top right of the scene view is basically a shading drop down, right? If you click on this, there's a lot of different options you have access to. Just basically different ways of displaying your geometry that could be helpful to you. So for example, we have smooth wire shaded. Right now we're on smooth shaded, which we can kind of see from the icon here. That's a matching icon right there, baby. It's like a third grade homework problem. Do the icons match? Yes, they do. So we know this is smooth shaded. What is smooth wire shaded? Well, that is going to add the wireframe or polygonal view on top. So it's going to smooth shade your geometry so that it doesn't look super rigid. Because if you look at this geometry itself, this is not a lot of polygonal data, right? This is not a very high def sphere. So it should be really quite sharp in how it appears. But since we are in smooth shaded, what that is doing is applying essentially a false smoothing operation to make it look smoother than it actually is. You can kind of see that with the specular highlight right here. This is just a default specular highlight that exists in our scene. And you can see it's not running over any hard edges like it totally would if that's how this geometry was actually constructed. One thing smooth shaded doesn't fix, though, is this surrounding. You can kind of see here how sharp this geometry appears because the silhouette is not being fabricated in any way. It's merely the normals of the object. And we'll get into normals and all that stuff at a later date.
But point is, you've got smooth shaded. This is kind of the default view, or smooth wire shaded is typically how I like to work, just to see what's going on. But there's other stuff too. There's flat shaded, and this is all of a sudden where you see that smoothing operation stripped away. This is the raw, ugly truth of your geometry. This is what it looks like, right? You can see each polygon with that real sharp fall off.
There's also flatline shaded with, that wire overlay as well, if you want to see that. Or one that you'll use a lot is this wireframe mode that basically strips everything but the polylines that comprise your geometry. There's no polygons blocking our view there. And there's also wireframe ghost, which is very interesting, where it is giving you that wireframe. You can kind of see through the polygons at about 50% opacity. So lots of different ways to operate. Typically, you'll find yourself most likely operating between a smooth shaded view and a wireframe view. And the peeps over at Houdini knew that was going to go down. So all you have to do is, when you're in the scene view here, just press W to activate that ghost wireframe mode, and then W again in order to get back to that smooth shaded wireframe mode. But the same is true of any of these modes, right? If I start in flat shaded without the wireframe and I hit W, I enter that ghost wireframe mode. I hit W again, I go back to what I was previously on. So basically the W key is just a toggle to wireframe from whatever you are currently at. Now, to the right of this, there's this little icon that looks like a sphere surrounded by some ghost geometry, right here. This is going to be very, very handy to you. You're going to use this all the time. Basically, this is visibility through contexts. And what that means is, if I have another geometry here on the OBJ level, let's say I have a box, and I move it over here, and we want to make changes to the internals of the sphere. So if we double click this, now we'll notice the box on the upper level has turned into ghost mode, basically. It is being allowed to exist even when going into this level, just for reference sake, in case you want that. So, for example, if I click and hold on this, I can choose hide other objects. And now, whenever I go inside an object, I just want that object. I want everything else removed from my view so I can work on that independently. But I can just change that and allow the ghost through, or I can change it and let all the solid geometry through. So I'm still seeing the full scope of my scene even while working on the internals of a given geometry. Super handy. And the last thing over here is your actual view layout breakdown, right, in the viewport. For example, let's say we are modeling and we want to see a perspective view, but we also want to see a top view, right, a top orthographic view of our scene. If we come over here, we can choose 4 views, 2 views stacked, 2 views side by side, lots of different combinations of views. Let's do 2 views side by side, for example. That will split our scene. And look, it gives me a top view and a perspective view. But by clicking in any of these boxes and hitting space 2, space 3, space 5, space 4, we can change, again, that orthographic view. We can also do 2 perspective views from different angles. You're totally free to do whatever you want. If I want every view, I want the front, I want the top, I want the side, and then I have my perspective, that's a great setup. But you can also very quickly toggle between these with control and the different numbers. For example, control 1 will give you 1 split, right? 1 main view in the scene view window. Control 2, you guessed it, that's 2. 3 is 3, 4 is 4, there is no 5. I just tried it, just out of curiosity. It doesn't exist. So this is a real quick way for you to, jump between different setups that you might want for various different operations inside of Houdini. Very, very helpful. So we've got those 3 things. But in true Houdini fashion, there are multiple ways to do the same thing. If you press V while in the scene view, essentially think of it as short for view, you can change your view settings. You can change the viewport layout right here by just dragging over and then selecting the one you want, or you can change the shading modes right here as well. There's also some selection options over here, to what we were talking about earlier. For example, if you wanted to do box or lasso selection, only selecting visible geometry like we looked at earlier, and other options there too. So this radial menu is there if you want it. I don't personally use it, but again, nice to know that it's there at least. Now, continuing on the theme of the viewport, right? There is the right-hand side of the scene view. And this has a lot of very helpful little buttons that we can use. And we'll go ahead and explore that now. I'm going to highlight and delete this box. We've got our sphere back. I'm going to go ahead and switch to smooth shaded mode. In fact, I'll go to smooth wire shaded mode. I like this one more. And let's go ahead and just do this one a little different. I'll just take a tour down the right-hand side to the most important nodes. So, right at the very top, we have a display reference grid, right? This is the world plane's ground zero, so to speak. And we can see that here, it's, if we navigate over, we can see some helpful information. Essentially our world scale in grid form. Houdini works in meters. So if you see -1, just know that is -1 meter in length from the center of the world. I'm going to get rid of that sphere here, but we can see the 0 here, -1, +1, and this is on the, let me actually rotate it this way. This is a little easier to see. In fact, I'll spacebar and go to the top view for a perfect view of this. So at the center of our world, we have 0, 0, 0, right? It is the 0 of the x-axis, of the z-axis, and of the, from the top view we can't see it, but the y-axis. This one, up and down. If I go to the side view, I'll go to the front view, we can see, yeah, a 0 in green as well. That's the y-axis. So popping back to the top view here, this is all in meters. This is 1 meter positive, 1 meter negative on the x. And you can also see this helpful little handle at the bottom left of the scene view that is showing you in real time as you navigate around which direction is x, y, and z. The direction of the line itself is the positive x, y, and z. So just know that if you are aiming the other way from that line direction, that is the negative of x, y, and z. Now, there are situations where you may want to get rid of this ground plane. For example, there are some times where we're working below the ground plane and I'm looking at my geometry and I'm navigating around. I've got this floating thing here that's just kind of in my way. By just clicking this, we can remove it from the scene entirely. And now you get this, this eternal wonderland of gridless space. It's pretty beautiful. We can turn that back on very easily, just toggling it. And then you may notice that there's a little black arrow at the bottom right of this icon, again, indicating that if we click and hold, there are other parameters that we can activate for this visualizer. Here we have ruler on the main axes, right? This is where we're seeing just that center line have the negative and positive numbers. But let's say we're working over here. I don't want to count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I just want to know what this distance is. So if I click and hold on this, I can actually choose ruler on grid points. And now I've actually got the negative values right there. I know this is -3 on the x and -3 on the y. So that's nice that you can toggle on. You can also obviously toggle everything off if you just want the grid for reference of where the ground should be in your scene. That's nice too. So I'm going to reset this, turn it off. Let's continue down. The next thing of import is this lock button. This is lock camera to view. So let's create a camera. We can hit tab and type in camera for now. We'll create that. And then if we navigate up here next to the perspective dropdown that we looked at where we can set all our different views, to the right of that we have no cam. This is where we can select our camera. You can see cam 1, the same naming convention. If I change this to cam 12 or whatever, then I'll see that's updated there. So if I click this, we are now looking through our camera. Now, we're not seeing anything because the camera defaults, if you create it with the tab menu, to 0, 0, 0, the center point of our world. But let's say we want to move it. Well, we can move it with this, as you might expect. But this is like, this sucks. I hate this. I don't want to do that. So let's actually reset to 0, 0, 0. And let's say I want to move this just like I would be, moving my scene. If I want to rotate my scene around and get a good view, this is the best way to do it. So if I want to set up my camera the same way, how would I do that? Well, this lock is one way to do that. If I go ahead and look through the camera and turn on the lock, now whenever I navigate as I normally would in Houdini, you see this letterbox stays there. This has to do with the aspect ratio of the camera settings, which we can look at later as well. But simply by roaming around and scrolling and zooming as I normally would, now I'm actually positioning my camera. If I turn this off and I zoom out, you see the camera now stays. Whereas if I'm in there, I lock it and now I zoom out, the camera moves with me. I'll unlock it, I'll zoom out again, and the camera's now in its new position. In this way, we can position our camera very freely. You will be toggling this a lot. There is a very real danger of forgetting this is on. Me warning you now will not save either of us in the future. We're going to make that mistake, and it's okay. But just remember, turn it on when you need it, and then as soon as you're done, turn it off so it doesn't cause you any more problems. Continuing down, we have the lighting section right here. All of these pertain to the exact same thing. If I have a light in my scene, I'm going to create a little light here. And in fact, I'll just move this over. This is the little shortcut command window, so you guys can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to zoom up. I want to put this back on the 0 of the ground plane. In fact, I'll put it 0.5, so it's kind of sitting on the ground here. I also want to create a grid This is going to basically give me a ground plane. And then this light, I'm going to lift it up above my scene, right? So what we've got is a point light above a sphere above a ground plane. And in that way, we are getting some light play. Now, it's not high quality. It's not like, you know, what you'd see in a final render, but it's giving us some idea of how the light is impacting our scene, right? We're getting that fall off of light, you know, as ghetto as it looks, and we're getting light cast on the surface of the ground as well. But we can change this, right? We can just toggle between these. Essentially, the very bottom here is disable lighting. This is not disabling your lighting in your scene for the render. It has nothing to do with that. I want you to separate those things in your mind. This all pertains, all down this side, only to what we are seeing in the viewport. It's all temporary. It's all just servicing us building the scene, and that's it. It doesn't go any further than that. So if we toggle disable lighting now, we've got no lighting. If we are also in smooth shaded mode, well, now we can't see a gosh darn thing. We have no dimensionality. So this is actually probably a better view of this. This is no lighting in the scene. We can then choose the headlight only. This will generate a temporary headlight in our scene that is tethered to where our view is. And you can kind of see that in the specular here on the sphere itself. Wherever we move, that specular exists because that headlight is essentially attached to our perspective of the scene. So in that way, you get consistent lighting, but we still get that dimensionality, right? That shadow that will separate objects in our perspective. That is very helpful when we're working with scenes. If you want to up it to the next level, you can enter normal lighting, and that's where we started, essentially. Again, these all have little buttons, so we can enable or disable the specular highlight, for example, from that light. We can enable and disable the diffuse itself. Like, we can customize each of these lighting setups in whatever way we want. There's a lot of flexibility in the scene view. We can also elevate and go to high-quality lighting. Now, it's a minor difference here, right? You're basically seeing like a slight shift in the specular. Of which we can also turn on and off. But like, there's other stuff too. Depth of field, bloom, like there's a lot of other things that we now have access to further build out our temporary view of what it is that we're building. And I use the lighting setups mainly as a tool for just adding dimensionality to my scene, to make it easier to see what I'm doing. Because again, I'm going to worry about all the lighting and making it look all sexy on the back end when it's time to render. For here, you may find this useful. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But there's also high quality lighting with shadows. Ooh, now look what we got. Now we've got it casting our hard shadow. If we change the light type to a light here with a little more area to it, right? Let's say we choose a disk instead. We rotate it, you know, I'll do negative 90 degrees so it's facing right down. Well, now look, we got like really nice shadows in this scene for the most part. Now, what you might have is point shadows right out the gate. That means no matter what the light source is, you are going to have these hard shadows. But the reality is, a quick lesson on light is the larger the source of light is, that is being cast on your object, the softer your shadows are, because the light is hitting it from more areas. So whereas one part of the light is casting a ray that is creating a hard shadow, the other part of the light is actually on the other side of the object and is filling in part of that hard shadow. So instead you get like a fall off. So an area this big, if I instead want to see what this really looks like, I can do area shadows and it'll take all that area of the light into account. You can see how much softer that shadow is now. Point is, you can access different levels of lighting in your scene for different purposes, right? Just with these toggles right here. Now, for this next section of the right-hand toolbar, I'm going to create a test geometry. And there's a lot of very helpful test geometries in Houdini that you can use for various purposes. They're basically built as a starting ground for testing. You know, if you're testing your systems and you want a specific setup piece of geometry, you can do that. I'm going to create my absolute favorite inside of Houdini. I think it's everyone's favorite. It's the pig head, this beautiful monstrosity right here. We're going to work with this for the next section. Because right here we have something that is on by default. And if you hover over it, you'll see what it is. It says display material on objects. Now, this object, the way that it's constructed in its internals, right, it has a material already assigned to it. So that's why we're seeing it in the viewport versus just if I created a sphere, it has no texture, it has no UVs, it's like not set up for it. But this test geometry is pre-set up with all of these things. So we can see its material here, but there are times where we don't want to be encumbered by seeing the material. And so this button right here will toggle that on and off. A sibling to this button is the one down here, which visualizes the actual UVs. It creates a very helpful grid pattern that lets us understand kind of how our UVs are divided. Again, this is something we are going to go into great detail on in the future, but in order to have a material tethered to your object in any sensical way, the object needs to have UVs to tell it how to apply that material, right? It's okay if that doesn't make sense now. Point is, if I turn off the material and I toggle this on, we will see, well, I see nothing. Okay, so I'll click and hold, and I'll actually let go on UV grid gray. Or UV color. Okay, we're having some weird glitch here. That's okay. Typically, if you toggle that, it'll show up, but I'm kind of glad you saw that, because if it doesn't, just go ahead and click and hold, and then just reset it by selecting something different. These are all just different visual variations of the same thing, but we can see the grid pattern that I'm talking about. This is how the UVs are constructed. Now, you can't have these both on at the same time. This is not how it should look. This is as good as time as any. Sometimes the scene view will jank the heck out. It's very strange. It doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to, at least in my experience. But if this ever happens, you can reset the viewport very easily. By going up to this Labs tab, you can just click Reset Viewport. And now it'll basically relaunch the whole thing and say, okay, I don't know where we got lost there, but let's start over. Why don't we start this relationship over again, keep it healthy. So now you can see, yeah, you can have both active there at the same time. It doesn't really matter. Again, these are just visibility preferences. So what else do we have down this right-hand side? Well, we have some very helpful visual displays. Now, you've heard me talk about visualizers a bunch to this point, right, with the handles and whatnot. Working in Houdini is predicated largely on being able to understand the information that you're looking at, right? And there are so many ways to do that, and there are so many different visualizers that you can even make to make sense of your scene. And right out the gate, there are some helpful ones that they have prepared for us. One is display points, right? This is comprised of lots of different points, but I can't see any of those points. The other geometry is in the way, so how do I know, right? If I go into select mode and I press 2, I can see those points. But what if I want to see those points while I have the transform tool active? Well, by clicking display points, that visualizes the points no matter what, right? It will prioritize the visualization of the points in the mesh, which is very helpful. If we go down, we have display normals. As a quick overview of what normals are, I'll give you my rendition of how I like to think of them. It's basically directional information from the surface that is conveying to the lights in the scene what direction the light should bounce, kind of conveying which direction is out. So if we create a normal node here, this will generate normals. Let's just change add normals to points for the sake of this visualization. Now, if we click this visualizer button for display normals, we will see, oh look, there are normals that are pointing essentially out and away from the surface. We'll use these a ton. But this is a very quick and easy way that we can visualize what our normals currently are, right? We can visualize our points and our normals. We can also visualize point trails. Point trails are essentially the opposite of the way normals are constructed. Normals point in the direction that they're aiming, whereas trails point in the direction that they just were. Where is this useful? Well, if we add some motion, so let's keyframe animate our pig here. Move it over here. We've got, some motion there. The point is not the animation here. The point is that it is moving, right? And if we then create a trail node to create some velocity, basically what we are doing is we're computing where it was in the previous frame, where each point was in the previous frame, and are calculating a velocity value for that. We can visualize that with this trails button right here, display point trails. So what you're seeing is where we came from, which is helpful. Now, if I increase this value, just so we can see it, if I make it way more dramatic, moving way, way faster, you'll see that the point trails have gotten bigger too, right? They are essentially showing exactly where those points were the previous frame before, which is good when we're trying to navigate motion blur and we're trying to navigate other things in Houdini. So just know this is how to display point trails. You can also visualize the point numbers. This will become very important down the line. But each point has a unique number that is associated with it. It's how Houdini tracks all the data and information that's going on in the scene. We can visualize that with this. Down here, we can also display the primitive numbers, right? They also have associated number values. So Houdini knows what to do with those as well, because remember, the points, the vertices, and the polygons are all separate entities that are working together to create this geometry, but they all have their own unique identification, so Houdini knows what is what. And then the other major thing that I use all the time is this right here, visualization. This tab we will go into as we actually create things in our scenes. By right-clicking on this, we can see a lot of gobbledygook that probably doesn't make any sense to us right now. But just know that this tab is to toggle on and off the custom visualizers that we make. Because again, these are all presets for our pleasure, so to speak. But we may want to create custom ones to visualize in the way that we want to visualize, because we are free entities up in Houdini. So this is how we toggle that on and off once we've created them. So we will definitely play with that quite a bit moving forward. Now, at this point, I'm sure you've heard me talk about the scale of Houdini enough to understand that it is a very deep software and hyper flexible. Again, I use the term sandbox very specifically because it's almost limitless, right? There's so much to navigate. We're talking right now about display settings, right, for your scene view in particular. Would you believe me if I told you this was just the tip of the iceberg? Do you remember up here in the shelf where I click the plus button and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of other shelves that aren't visible? Well, the same is true for the display settings, right? We've got all of these options here that are pertinent and important, and that's why they're promoted to the surface for us to interact with in this way. If you select the scene view and you press D, we get a pop-up of our display options, right? These are these. How do we know that, for example? Well, if we check to show point numbers in here, we can see that the point numbers toggle activates here. These are interconnected. A lot of these are interconnected. The normals are interconnected. The point visibility is interconnected. But we also have access to a whole host of additional controls that we don't on the toolbars, right? Just due to space, real estate, really. One of the most important is in the background tab here. You can even see that these are organized very nicely. Markers, guides, geometry, scene, camera, like these display controls are organized in a way that makes finding them very, very simple. But there's a great deal of flexibility that exists. For example, one of the major ones that I use all the time is in the background tab. We have the color scheme of the display section. If you are working with white smoke, and you have a light background, oftentimes it makes it difficult to judge the density of that smoke in the window. So you can easily change from a color scheme of light to dark, right? Or gray, or, you can even customize if you want to get real fancy with it. I don't do that myself. But point is, there's a ton of options in the display pop-up that we can use to further help visualize our scene. I'll give you one more example. If we drop another sphere down, I'm actually going to go inside this, and I am going to add an add node, which has this very helpful toggle where I can delete all the geometry but keep the points. So basically, point is, I just want the points from this sphere for now. I'm going to toggle off this visibility here and just see the points as they are in the scene. Now, let's say I want to make these points more visible, for example. Well, there's no options on the right-hand side for that, but I know that in the display options in the geometry tab, I have control over the particles themselves, at least how they're visualized. So here we have display particles as points, and then we have a point size. By clicking and dragging this, I can actually increase the size of the points in my scene. If I have a massive point simulation that we'll see later, we may not want to visualize them as points at all because the points are too big and doesn't give us a good understanding of the shape and dimensionality of our simulation, in which case we can change the actual display to, instead of being points, be no bigger than pixels. Now, right now I don't have nearly enough, but if you have enough particles stacked on top of each other, visualizing them as pixels instead of points is very, very helpful in understanding what we're looking at. So just be aware, we don't need to know a great deal of this right now. We will use it sparingly throughout the duration of this course, and you'll start to pick up little tricks along the way, but just know that this is here, right? A deeper well of display control for us in terms of navigating the information inside of our scene view. Now, I can hear you through the screen, right? You're going, enough, Jordan. Enough of the display options. I don't care about visuals. I care about time. To that I say, that's a weird sentence. I don't know why you care about time so much, but sure, I'll indulge. Let's talk about the timeline. That was an amazing segue. We'll go ahead and delete everything in our scene. We've got a clean scene here. At the bottom, you may have noticed by now, there is, of course, a timeline, right? This is exactly what you'd expect. Right at the left here, we have our go to end, go to beginning. We have play forward, play backwards. We have a stop button. But you'll notice if you do hit play, which you can just hit the up arrow to do as well, it's going so fast, right? That's because this button right here is not active. This is an important button. This is the real-time toggle. If you press this, now we are getting playback in real time along our timeline. That is important because if I create a box, I keyframe this, I keyframe the center, and then, let's say over the duration of the entire thing, I want it to move that far. I keyframe that too. If this is off and I want to play back my animation and get a sense of what it looks like, this is not at all a realistic depiction, right? This is way too fast. This is what it actually looks like. So important that you have this active if you need it. I don't really understand use cases where you don't have it on, to be honest with you. So I would just leave this on for the duration of everything that we do here. Now, a little bit more information here. We can see numbers here, right? 2 number 1s there, and then 2 number 240s here. By default, your scene will be 240 frames. That is 10 seconds, right? Because the default frame rate is 24 frames per second inside of Houdini. The very left button here is essentially the if you hover over it, it'll tell you it's the global animation start frame. This is essentially the start frame of your scene. The very end one here is the end frame of your scene. And these ones are merely the in and out clamps of what we are seeing in our timeline. If I shrink this, for example, you'll notice the timeline is changing. Now, note that my scene duration is not changing. My scene is still very much 240 frames. But what I have access to in the timeline is a shrunk down version of that, just for the sake of temporal resolution, so to speak, which is, my fancy way of just saying zooming in on the timeline. All right, I shouldn't have said temporal resolution. I'm sorry. I got carried away a little bit. Point is, now we've got a shrunk down version of our timeline that we can also, click right in the middle of this thing and just drag around to reframe. Now we have frame 1 through frame 71, or we go, frame 170 to frame 240. The in and outs here will show you in real time what our in and outs of the timeline are. But if we want to trim the actual duration, let's say, let's go back to 1 and 240 so we can see the full expanse of our timeline. If we actually want to trim the duration, let's say we don't want a 10-second thing, we want a 5-second thing. Well, we can actually just enter in our new duration right here, 120 frames, and that will clip everything, including the out point of our timeline, since we no longer extend past 120 frames, right? Now I've got this new look. Another way of doing this, I'll move this out of the way real quick. Another way of doing this is to click right here, the global animation options. You can hit Alt-Shift-G to open this up, or you can just navigate over and press on this button right here. This is the global animation options, which gives you information about your overall timeline and project, right? We can see the frames per second is 24. We can see the start and end of our scene, along with some other helpful stuff. One of the things being this playback, integer frame values, which if you don't know what an integer is versus a float and whatnot, we will get into that a little bit later, but this is helpful because, as it currently stands, we can navigate 1 frame at a time, but sometimes you may have sub-step information inside of your scene that you want to look at. And so by checking this, instead of going 1 whole number at a time, we can give a fraction of a number. So we're doing 0.1 now. So look, I'm at frame 13. Now I'm 13.1, 0.2, etc. And you can totally customize this however you want. I'm going to check that back on so we have integer frame values again. And I'm going to close this. So just be aware this is here if you need it. Okay, so by now you have probably seen me do my fair share of keyframing, right? I do it real quick, do a little animation, and I want to talk a little bit about that, how to actually keyframe your own animations. Keyframes are basically used to essentially timestamp locations in space or specific parameters for things. You can think of it as a key frame. It's a frame of great import, right? It's key to what we're trying to do here. So if we create, we'll hop up to the OBJ level here. I'll just clear my scene and I'll create a cube. And in this little experiment, I want to animate this cube purely along, let's actually animate it along all three axes, these translation axes. So I have it selected. How do I actually go about creating a keyframe? Well, let's go back to frame 1 in our scene. And if I hover over any one of these boxes and I hold Alt and left mouse button click, it will create a green box here. But this green box always means that this is a keyframe, an animated keyframe, right? I can keyframe this, I can keyframe this, and you'll see on the timeline a little green box has now appeared, letting us know that there is a keyframe of some kind in our scene on this frame. It doesn't dictate exactly what it is. It could be anything. It could be multiple parameters that are keyframed. Like in our case, we have 3, but there's only one icon here. It just lets us know on that frame there is some animation, which helps us when we're navigating around the scene and looking for the important frames that we want to tweak after we've already done our animation. Point is, we've got it here. If we want to undo that animation, we hold Control and left click. That deletes it entirely. If I hold Alt and I click on the name of a 3-value parameter like this, it will keyframe all 3 values. Same is true if I Control click. So let's animate the translation here. Let's hit Alt and click to create our keyframe. We will then scroll all the way to frame 120, and we will then move this in space on the X-axis, on the Z-axis, and on the Y-axis. Now you'll notice these parameters are now green again, and it has created a keyframe. It did it automatically. And now in between these frames, it will interpolate between our keyframes, right? I'm not sure if it's on by default or not, or if it's just my setup, but this key right here to the very right of the timeline, this icon here to the right of the timeline, is where we can set up if we want auto keyframing or not. If we undo this, I'll Control click to get rid of that. And before I move it in 3D space, I'm going to click this little drop down. And I'm going to turn off auto key changes. Now you'll see that icon changes. Auto is now gone. So if I move it on the X, on the Z, and on the Y, now we've got like this dirty mustard color that is letting us know, hey, you've made changes to these parameters, right? But it's not confirmed yet. Like, you have not locked in this keyframe. So if you want to do it, you better do it, or else if you move away from this frame before locking it in, it resets it and it undoes it. It says, obviously, that was a mistake, right? So we'll do that again. Boom, boom, boom. And we will keyframe, keyframe, keyframe. And now we have that interpolation between those two positions. So if you want to have auto keyframes on or not, that's your choice. There is an actual keyframe button here that you can click and it'll keyframe certain parameters in the node. But to be totally honest with you, I don't even know how it decides which ones to keyframe there. Like, I didn't have anything highlighted. It just picked translate, rotation, and scale, but completely ignored our boys pivot, translate, and pivot, rotate. You know? That's not cool, man. That's not cool. So, I don't typically use this button. I like to just use the Alt and Control click approaches to creating keyframes. Now that we've got the keyframe, we can play it back in real time. And looking at it, we are noticing it is easing into the animation and then easing out of the animation, right? It's not a linear animation. It's not consistent. If we want it consistent, well, we can go ahead and change the actual animation curves ourselves. We can click on this animation editor button. We've been living in the scene view this whole time. We've been comfortable, right? We've made our little home here. Well, it's time to get uncomfortable, Frodo. It's time to venture outside of the Shire into a new tab. We are going to leave our beloved scene view, and we are going to click on the animation editor, right? This is a whole new world for us. Navigating in here is fairly straightforward. You right-click and drag in order to pan. You middle mouse button and drag to scale. You can either drag to the right to expand or up and down to shrink and grow. It's very intuitive. And then you can also use a scroll wheel to zoom out and, left mouse button click to highlight certain keyframes. Now, these are our keyframes. These are the X, Y, and Z translate values manifest as curves. But what does that actually mean? Well, if we click down here in our channel list, we can see our geometry name box one. These are the values of the box right now. These are not keyframed, so there's nothing about these that would be indicative of that. But the bottom, the translate ones, look, they're green here as well to let us know that they exist and they are animating. If we click on any of these values, we will realize it in the animation editor, right? If we click, hold shift, and then click on Translate Z to highlight all of them, we can then see them all at the exact same time, right? Up here, we see the timeline. We see, frame 0 going up to frame 120, so that makes a lot of sense. And we can see the easing that we're talking about. Now, just for sake of visibility and simplicity, I'm only going to select the Translate X for now. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to move around, and we will see, yep, sure enough, it is easing into the animation, and it's easing out. If we click and drag on any of these keyframes, we will see the handles of that, right? If we click and drag, we can actually change the value of that keyframe. And by clicking and dragging on the handles, we can change the easing amount and the easing duration and really alter the way that our animation works. For sake of simplicity, I'm going to do something that we'll look at in a second, and I'm going to split this top and bottom so that we can still see our scene view. Don't worry about that. I'll cover that in a moment here. But here we can see our animation and our curve in the same thing, which will help us make a little more sense of this. Now, I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm having an issue. I'm so tired of trying to drag this around and scale it to fit in the frickin' window. Well, if I click in the animation editor, I can just click F to frame my selection to the window. This is true of all of them as well. If I highlight all of them and I press F, it's going to frame it all to the scale of the animation editor that exists in my viewport here, which is very helpful. So we can see it eases in, and then it eases out. Well, let's say I don't want to deal with that. Well, I can click and drag on this keyframe. Again, we'll switch back to just X here. I can click and drag on this keyframe, and I can shrink this down by clicking and dragging this so that it doesn't exist. And I can click and drag on this to shrink it so it doesn't exist. And now I have a linear interpolation of the X, right? No more easing, at least on that axis. I'll Control Z to undo that. If you click and drag and hold Control, well, now it actually locks it, because, if you're just clicking and dragging, you can move it up and down on accident. Let's say you don't want to do that. You just want to shift the duration of the handle. If you hold Control and click and drag, you can just do that and drag it all the way in. Do the same here. Control drag all the way in. And now you have a truly linear interpolation. You can actually just highlight the keyframe here, click on the handle itself, and you'll get numbers down here. You can actually see acceleration 1.6. So let's say I want it to be an even slower ease in. Well, I'll up that to 3 instead. I want it to be a 3-second ease in. I mean, you can see that right here. The easing starts at frame 0 and it ends at frame 72. At 24 frames per second, that is 3 seconds. So we can shrink that down to 1 second or get rid of it entirely at 0. Again, lots of ways to do the same thing in Houdini. Resetting this one more time. Another way that we can do this. I'll scale this up for now. But another way that we can do this, if we highlight both of our keyframes, let's say we just want to linearize it without clicking and dragging anything at all. Well, there are buttons up here as well that have control over how our handles operate. This, for example, the straight button will just pop them into being straight right away. If we want to get that back, we can click this one, Bezier handles, to get our Bezier handles back that we can now click and drag. Or we can click this one right here, set selected slopes to automatic, which will create automatic ease in and ease out, right? Lots of ways to play with this, lots of flexibility. You'll notice that they gray out the minute that I click away from any of the keyframes. The minute I highlight it back, they're back again. Now there's also display settings. As now you might expect, right? Everything has display settings in Houdini. It's fantastic. Let's zoom in super tight here. Let's say we're in a section, we're really working on this handle, and then I want to frame up the entirety of Translate X. I can choose vertical adapt and horizontal adapt to reframe top to bottom and then reframe left to right as well. Or I could, again, zoom in here, get all lost, and then by highlighting our Translate, clicking in the scene and pressing Control A to select all the keyframes that are a part of this slope, we can now hit F or press this button right here to frame that selection perfectly within the bounds of our animation editor. All of these things can be played with and tested. It's changing what handles you have access to, what numbers are visible to you, and can be altered however much or little you want. I typically don't touch any of this. I don't do a ton of animating in here, and when I do, it's really just a matter of changing the easing amounts for the animations or just making them full linear animations. But there's a ton of flexibility that exists in here where you can create a new keyframe and then, completely alter the way that your animation plays. Now, we were talking about framing a selection. There is one thing I want to cover real quick, and that's that you can do the same thing with geometry. If I create another sphere in the scene, and I move that way out yonder, and I'm working on this, and I want to frame the sphere, but let's say I'm lost. I'm like, where'd it go? You know, you get lost sometimes. It's okay. It's okay to admit. Let's shrink that down. I just click that little button to collapse it. Let's say we're lost, and we want to get to that sphere. How do we do that? Well, we can frame, if we highlight this, we can hit spacebar and F to frame this selected, or select this, spacebar F to frame this selected, or spacebar and H to frame all the geometry in our scene. So we get like the full macro perspective of our scene. Spacebar F and spacebar H for that. Anyway, that was just a little subplot there. We're doing side quests now. Figured that was useful information for you to jot down in your notes. But the take home from this really is more about the animation editor. I want to touch one more time on this as far as additional ways to access this tab, or at least a less obtrusive version of it. Let's say you want to keep your viewport as it is. You can simply hover over the parameters that you want to edit the curves of and hold Shift and click to get a pop-up version of this animation editor in your scene. Now I can actually edit my animation in a less obtrusive way. I can add another keyframe there, and then I'll add another keyframe there, and I'll drag this over, and I'll change this, and I'll drag that around, and I will make what may be deemed the most hideous animation of all time. And the cool thing is I just did it live because I'm that good. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now, clearing my scene here, I do want to show you one more thing. If I create a sphere at the center of our world, I'm going to frame up to that, and I, keyframe the translation there, and let's say I just move it on the X, for example. I've got this, right? Let's say I play this back, and man, I wish it was stretched out a little more. Well, now I have to go back here, delete, and then go here and set a new one. Wouldn't it be great if I could just drag this keyframe in the timeline over a little bit? Well, you probably guessed that you can. It'd be crazy if you couldn't do that. But the way you do it, you don't click and drag, you're going to lose your mind. That's just how you navigate through the timeline. What you want to do is middle mouse button click and drag. That's how you kind of claim a keyframe and move it around. But you'll notice it's kind of a funky navigational system because you get these handles over here that you can left click and drag and actually expand. And the way that this works is you can middle mouse button click to create your window, and then expand the window to encapsulate more than one keyframe. Now, if you middle mouse click and drag, you can move the collection of keyframes over in any way that you want. Just wanted to touch on that real quick. Really proud of you guys. We're ripping through a lot of stuff here. This is fantastic. I hope you're enjoying it so far. There's so much to explore, and I really can't wait to contextualize all of this for you guys in the actual projects we do. But what I want to look at now is very important, and we're going to use it a ton. So I wanted to at least touch it in this section. Right now I have a scene, right? I have a sphere that is being copied to a bunch of animated points on a grid that are moving up and down, and we have a whole army of spheres here that are undulating and bouncing free. If I pop out here to the OBJ level and I want to see what this animation looks like, well, I've got my real-time toggle checked, so that's good. And I'm going to push play, and what we're getting is, well, it just hit 24 frames. It took like 4 seconds to reach 1 second. The reality is there's too much geometry or too much information to compute in real time to get any sort of real-time playback. So what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to know if this looks good? I don't want to render a final image and waste all that time only to have it look like garbage. Well, that is where the flipbook comes in. The flipbook is this button right down here. Now, don't press it yet. Pressing it will activate it. Let's actually pause our scene and right-click on this for me. This will give you a flip up with new settings little toggle button that we can press, which will open up our render flipbook pop-up. Now, these are essentially the settings for what will eventually be a preview render, so to speak, of our scene. It's essentially a cached version of our viewport that we can play back in real time in order to make sure that our animations look good. Now, right out the gate, you may see there's a few tabs of settings, but let's stay in the output tab for now. The main and most important one is this frame range. This is just asking what range of frames do you want to render essentially into this flipbook preview. Now, we've got a $RF start and $RF end. This is short form code. It's called HScript. We are going to talk about HScript later on. So for now, let's get rid of this and just replace it with 1 and replace this with 120 because I know I want the frame range to be 1 to 120 like my timeline is. Now underneath this, a very big gotcha. This one got me so hard in the beginning. If scoped channel keyframes only is toggled on, you will have a bad time because if there are no keyframes in your scene, it will do nothing. I can prove this by pressing start and it says flipbook generation complete, but I got a whole lot of nada, right? It's only looking to generate flipbooks for animation frames and whatnot. Now, I don't have traditional keyframes in here, so it's not going to do anything for me. That's no good. I always turn that off. That just causes way more problems than you'd want. I mean, it literally tells you here the memory usage. If you toggle that on, it reduces it to 0 images. It's going to make no images for you. If I have keyframes here, let's say I create a keyframe there, and then I create a keyframe there. I'm just moving the whole lot of them for whatever reason. Now I turn on scope channel keyframes only, and look, it's up to 2 images. That means it's only going to create a preview for the 2 images that have keyframes. That's not useful in my opinion. Let's turn that off. We want to have control over the full frame range of what we want to render. So we don't want that. Turn that off. And actually, let's delete these awful keyframes. With those keyframes deleted, let's just go ahead and press start and see what we get. When we press start, maybe we'll get this pop up. I'll go ahead and allow access there. And what we are getting is, again, a playback of the entire frame range that we selected in its own little mplay window. So when it's done, we have a real-time playback of what we would have seen in the viewport had it been capable of doing it in real time. Another helpful little thing in here is this top right button right here. This is the disconnect. So, for example, if I shrink this down and I move this over here, and let's say I change something. Let's say I make it way lower. That's it. That's the only change. And then I want to do another preview. If I push this button now, if I left mouse button click on this, we'll see it is overwriting what we just did, right? Every single frame. Now, if we go back, it's the lower version. But if we go further on to the ones that haven't done it yet, it's the higher version. This may be what you want to do. You may want to overwrite it immediately, and that's fine. But maybe you don't. Maybe you want to A/B test, right? I do it a lot, right, with different simulations, and just to see the difference between the two. If you click this top right button, this disconnect, this window is now completely separated from what Houdini is doing. It's its own entity now. It's no longer connected to the active Houdini session. So what I can do is I can highlight this, I can bring this way up, and then I can run another one. And what it'll do is it will create a new pop-up now. Now I have 2, and I can directly compare them by playing them both side by side to see which one I like better. So that's really cool. Super duper helpful, right? One of the aspects, though, is this kind of looks a little bit like butt cheeks, to be totally honest with you. The quality on these viewport renders by default aren't that great because they don't have to be, right? It's not important that it's super high quality. It's mainly, its main purpose is just to give you some semblance of an idea of what your scene is looking like when it's played back in real time. If I pause this and I go down though, and let's say, we can see up at the top here, 1280 by 720. We can see the resolution of this play blast, so to speak. If we right click here and go to flipbook with settings, well, now we can navigate over to the size tab and we can actually change the resolution of our next flipbook render. We can also go into the effects tab, and in the anti-alias section, we can choose high quality. We can even add motion blur if we want to. With specific shutter. The motion blur always ends up looking really grainy because it's all temporary anyway. But let's say we raise the anti-alias quality and the resolution. We can now start that one instead. And the quality of this one is is much, much better right out the gate. And we can see we've got that 1920 by 1080 resolution. And just one more time, a reminder, if you're having any issues with the flipbook, check that scoped channel keyframes only is toggled off. That'll save you a massive throbbing headache. I guarantee it. All right, so moving on, there is one more tab that I want to introduce you to. You can see up here there are a collection. There's 6 total. The only one that I want to cover right now really is the geometry spreadsheet, because this is one that we're going to be using a lot. If we go ahead and click on this, we can see what really appears to be a whole lot of gobbledygook. I'm going to move this over here. A lot of data on this sheet. This sheet really is the hub of Houdini's brain. It is letting you know all the data that exists in your scene and is essentially spreadsheeting it for your pleasure. Now, this doesn't really mean anything on its own. If we go back over to the scene view, we can maybe contextualize this a little bit more and help make sense of it. In the sphere node itself, I am generating a color randomly based on the primitive, meaning every single primitive in this scene has been assigned a random color. Now, in the viewport, we are seeing that color, and that's all well and good. But what is the color comprised of? Well, a color attribute is comprised of 3 values. You can think of it as a red, blue, and green value. You may be familiar with this in other DCCs, other softwares, where you can create any combination of colors by assigning it a red value between 0 and 1, a green value between 0 and 1, and a blue value between 0 and 1. Now, in this way, it has assigned random values to the red, blue, and green channel for the primitive. If you can think of any color as a combination of 3 values between 0 and 1 in a red, blue, and green channel, then it makes sense that the color that we're seeing is just a combination of those numbers. Those numbers are stored in the geometry spreadsheet. So I will toggle this button. To display the primitive numbers, right? And we'll go to the top here, and we can find number 0 right here. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. So with 0 active, we can see it's kind of like a purpley, pinky color. You can see I did a lot of color study, right? Based on my deep knowledge of color names. But if we go over to the geometry spreadsheet and we go to the 0, well, one thing I will show you right out the gate, though, is the geometry spreadsheet is separated into the points attributes, the vertices attributes, the primitives attributes, and the detail attribute. Now, the points, that's every point in our scene. Vertices, every vertex in our scene. Primitives, every primitive in our scene. But detail, that's the overall geometry. So we can assign attributes to the whole geometry as well. But just know that that's the breakdown. So considering that in our scene, I have color on the primitive class that is randomly being assigned, if we go to the geometry spreadsheet, right out the gate, you'll see there's no value at all. What is this? This is position of the points in 3D space. Our position X, position Y, position Z, right? So that's where it is in 3D space. That makes sense. But if we go over to the primitives tab, now we can see CDR, CDG, and CDB, right? This is the color for the red, blue, and green channel. And we can see this is the color combination for the red, blue, and green that makes up this color right here. And more so, we have every single primitive's color combination. But attributes are not in any way limited to color. In fact, they're not limited to anything at all. You can create an attribute value from anything for anything. The point of these attributes, for example, is for, let's take the points. Each point in the scene to hold on to an important bit of information that can be used later in order to do another thing with that information. For example, if you have a particle simulation, you will have them hold on to their individual age, how long they have existed for in frames or seconds, and then you can delete particles that exist beyond 5 seconds because each particle knows how long it existed for. Points are very responsible adults. We give them a value, and then when we call out that value, we say everyone with a value above X step forward, those points step forward, the rest step back, right? It gives us control over a lot of different things. And we can create them in a lot of different ways. For example, I will use an attribute create node right here. I'll turn off the bypass. I'll go down. I already created this, but you can see in the name, I created an attribute called new with a value of 0. Now, it is going to create this on every single point, right? Class point in our scene. And we can see that in the geometry spreadsheet. If it's bypassed, it doesn't exist. But the minute that we activate it, it has created an attribute that is called new with a value of 0 on every single point in our scene. And if I change that value to 1, it's updated. It's updated across every single point. This by itself is not very useful, but like the examples I was talking about earlier, let's look at a useful use case. Let's say, for example, we have this geometry, and for whatever reason, we want to delete randomly half of the polygons on the geometry. This may happen if you have too dense of a point cloud with a particle simulation, and you just want to randomly cull half of the particles. How can we do this? Well, we'll go into this node later, but there's a very simple bit of code here where I'm basically creating a random attribute, a random float attribute, and on that attribute, I am randomly assigning a value between 0 and 1 to each primitive on my geometry. Don't let this intimidate you. We will go into detail, and this very soon will make a whole lot of sense. The point of this is that on the geometry now, on the primitives in particular, because that's where I ran it over, I have created a random value between 0 and 1. We can see that throughout the entirety of my geometry. Then what I'm doing is with a blast node, it's a simplified version of Houdini's delete node. You'll use it a lot. I am entering another little bit of code into the group that I want this to run over. I'm saying, hey, if your attribute random that was assigned to you is greater than 0.5, I want you to get deleted. Step forward, primitives, if your value is greater than 0.5. And they do, and then we delete them. So in this way, I have assigned a random value, and then I have used it to delete geometry. Over the duration of this course, you will truly start to unlock the power of these attributes, right, in the geometry spreadsheet. And in this way, the geometry spreadsheet is very, very important to have on screen at all time. Now, right now, in its current configuration, we have to either see our scene view or see the data. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could see both at the same time? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do in the next video. Again, particularly for this topic, please do not worry if this doesn't make full sense. It will. Because if I can understand it, I guarantee you, with enough exposure to it, you can too. The primary goal of this video is to bring the geometry spreadsheet into view so we can see both things at the same time. But this does raise a larger question of the overall organization of our scene, right? We've got our network view, we've got our parameters, we've got our scene view, but what if we want to customize this a little bit? I mean, there's a setup that I've been using for a long time that I really like, and I want to show you guys how to set it up as well. So let's do that right now. First things first, let's clean up these tabs. This is not necessary, by the way, what I'm doing right now. I haven't even done this myself, but I figure, hey, while we're all here cleaning our room, I'll clean mine too. I'll clean mine up a little bit as well. So I got some good stuff coming out of this as well. This render view tab is the first one I want to get rid of. We will go into this at a later date, but essentially there are two renderers that are native to Houdini. There is the mantra renderer, or the mantra renderer if you're a US citizen. That is the old version of Houdini's built-in renderer, right? Karma is the other one, and that is the one that the side effects team is focusing on, right? That's the future GPU accelerated renderer that we'll be using for the duration of this entire series. I may touch on Mantra just so you guys have seen it and can explore it a little bit if you want to, but just know I do believe they are kind of throwing that baby out with the bathwater at some point. So this is the render view that we used to use for that. Let's close that out. Let's also get rid of the composite view and the motion effects view for now. We can always add those later. Let's also get rid of the geometry spreadsheet. If you accidentally close something that you didn't want to, let's say we got the scene view and we closed it. Whoops. Well, we can click this new tab button right here or press Control-T. And we can choose what tab we want to open up. Now, you know, there's a lot of them, right? Again, the majority of the stuff is hidden underneath the surface for Houdini. It really depends on your needs. So for us, you know, in the viewers, the scene view is what we need. Now, it's also good to know how to create this because, again, if you are having a glitch in your scene view and you don't have labs installed for whatever reason, so you can't hit reset viewport, then you can just close it out, open a new pane tab type, go to viewers, and open up the scene view. And then you've got it. You can just click and drag it to reorder it as well to your heart's content. These are the only two that I think we need open for our purposes.
But I do want to get the geometry spreadsheet open. And I want it to be on screen at the same time, either to the left of the scene view or to the bottom. Now, considering the majority of things that we're going to be doing in film will probably be roughly a 16:9 aspect ratio, right? It makes more sense for it to be the bottom. Because considering my actual monitor is 16:9 and this is eating into that space, 16:9 is somewhere in here. Perfect for a little bit of geometry spreadsheet right at the bottom if I want it, which I do. So let's go ahead and click this little drop down right here at the top right. And just so you know, this is the maximize pane button. If you ever want to just go full screen, well, not full screen, sorry, but dominate the view outside of the tabs and bars and whatnot with your scene view, you can do that. And you can do that with any of these, right? At any time, which is great. So very handy. But I want to click the button to the right of that, the little drop down arrow. You can see it's the pane tab operations. And here is where we have a little bit of flexibility in how our panes are laid out. What we want to choose is to split the pane top and bottom. And this will create essentially a duplicate pane underneath my other one. So I'll move this out of the way. And then here is where I want to hit that plus button. I'll go to my inspectors and my geometry spreadsheet. I can now close that scene view, and then we only have one. And you'll notice in the middle, there are sections for you to click and drag to extend or contract your windows. And there's also little buttons to the left and the right, which if you click, will fully collapse or expand these things as well. And these exist on every border of every window, basically. Okay, so that's great. I'll put this over here again. Another thing that I want to do is I want to split my network view and my parameters window left and right so that I have two versions of them. I'll show you why that is. If I have a sphere and I got my camera and all these goodies, and I'll create a box, I have access to either inside of this, the parameters of this, or inside of this, the parameters of this. Now, if I am editing these in relation to one another and I'm going in here and I'm making a change here for whatever reason. Now I need to make a change to the box, so I go back out, and then I go back in here, and then I highlight this, and I, make a change here, and maybe I rotate it. That gets a little old, going out and in and out and in. There are a few ways to navigate this headache. The first is to hit Control and press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. You see how it's saying Set Quick Mark there? This is very handy. If I hit Control 1, and then I go to another context entirely, and I hit Control and press 2, now if I just press 1 or 2 when in the network view, I jump to my quick mark, right? It's almost like a bookmark location. So you can set those up. But sometimes it's nice to have them both open at the same time. And so what we can do right here is off to the right, click that same pane tab operations dropdown, and split pane left and right. I'm going to do the same thing up here, split pane left and right, and I get a duplicate. Now I can jump into one on one side or jump into the other on the other side. The problem right out the box, though, is if I jump into one, look, it changes both. Well, that's frustrating. Luckily, there is the ability to pin things, which is just literally right here. If you look at this one, it's saying linked to the same numbered panes. So if we look at the other panes, what do we see? We've got a 1 here, a 1 here, and a 1 here. So if I make a change in here, in this pane, it's updating all these panes. But if I leave these two both as 1, because I want the parameters tethered to what's going on in the network view underneath it, but I change this by clicking and holding to 2, and then I change this to 2, now, if I go back out, we stay in. And now I've got parameter access for this, and if I go into the box here, I've got parameter access for this. Right, I can do whatever changes I want. I'm going to collapse this for now just for more visibility in the scene view. You can also pin your scene view itself too. Now, right now it's following selection. Whatever you are clicking is what it is showing in the viewport. But typically, I like to use this secondary portion, right, the right-hand side of this split, as my additional tweaks, meaning I don't really like to visualize them. I like to keep whatever's in the left section visualized and just tweak the parameters of the right side to update whatever I'm seeing. So what I do typically is I click on the pin here, click and hold, and I let go on one there. So now this is tethered specifically
to this. So just a real quick recap, changing this to 1, 1, 1. So these are always tethered, and then adding a split to 2 and 2, just so we can use it in the future. That'll come in a lot of handy. For the most part, though, I do collapse these until they're needed, and then they're just out of the way. You know, I can very quickly just pop these open and make any tweaks I need, and then shut it again. Now, if you just close Houdini after doing this, and you open it up again, everything will be back to normal. We don't want to waste time doing that every single time we open the software. And so we're going to save the layout, which you can do in this dropdown right here. It says build. This is the currently active desktop layout, right? And we can save the current desktop, meaning that the build layout will now be what we've created, or we can save the current desktop as, I'll call it Jordan's default. That's what I'll call mine. So now, in Jordan's default, we've got our splits as needed. That does raise the question real quick on, what are these? Well, these are preset setups for you that you can use when doing specific things in Houdini. For example, we will typically live over the duration of this tutorial series in our custom setup, the one we just did right now, and the Solaris Look Dev setup, which is more for rendering and whatnot. You know, really, when you're working in any different contexts, as we've kind of lightly discussed in the past, there are different default setups for tools and visualizers for the specific thing that we're working on. So, you know, the Solaris Look Dev is designed specifically for designing your lighting and layout for final render. Now, I've danced around this idea of contexts a bit, and I think it's time to make a dedicated video about it. Inside of Houdini, there are lots of different boxes where different work goes on. Now, those boxes, metaphorical boxes, so to speak, are contexts. You can think of it as, you know, in a school, there's a room for math, there's a room for English, there's a room for history. These are dedicated rooms to do dedicated things. But the students go between each of these rooms. So too can the information inside of Houdini be passed between these contexts. But it's more of an organizational structure, in my understanding, as to why it is laid out in this way. I'm sure there's probably some reason under the hood that I don't know about, but to me, I just like to think of it as organizationally based. Right? So, for example, we are very familiar now with our OBJ level, right? Our geometry, our scene view, so to speak. And if we hop inside of one of these geometry nodes, now we enter the SOP contexts, right? Surface operators. This is the room dedicated for working on the internals of what makes this geometry what it is. We hop back out and we've got our scene view, our room dedicated to organizing our scene. But there are others. If you click on this drop down right here, there is the CH room. What is this? This is the motion effects network. You can see in the top right, it actually tells you what the context is. This is known as CHOPS, channel operators, animation channel operators, to be specific. And we're not going to go into vivid detail as to how to use all these things right now. I just want to introduce you to the rooms. We will be using this primarily when we do crowd stuff at the end of the entire course. There is the image context, also known as COPS, compositing operators. This is where you can actually do compositing. And I know Houdini's pouring a lot of resources into their compositing, right? Because there's a lot of power and potential. I still use Nuke myself for all of those things, so I don't really use the compositing context. But if you look, by creating an image network, I think it's in there by default, and heading inside of it, you can create a compositing setup to get a final image if you want. For example, if I hit tab and I type file, hit enter, by default, it loads this picture of a butterfly. I have no idea why or where this came from. It's kind of iconic at this point, though. Whoever came up with that, you know, I wish it was the pig head, personally. But, you know, we've got our file that we can load in all the parameters for that. And then if we hit tab again and type in color correct, hold shift and hit enter, now we can actually make changes, but we can't see where it is. Well, that's because the compositing context needs the compositing viewport. In this case, the composite view. It's one of the ones we closed earlier, that if you hit plus and head over to viewers, we can see composite view here. Just like the motion effects section would need the motion effects view in order to see what's going on. So now with the display flag over the file, we see the butterfly, and then with the display flag over the color correct, as we make changes, we can see the effects that is having, right? We can make all the changes we want, and then, you know, render out new imagery and whatnot. We've got the material context. The material context, or mat context, as I'm sure you can expect, is for creating materials, right? This is going to be our little work zone for creating and generating materials that we can apply to our objects. If we hit this drop down again, we head on over to the OBJ. We know this one, so we'll move on to the out context. Now, this is what Mantra used to use. I mean, it still does. I'm acting like it's dead. It's not dead. Mantra is still a thing. But again, they are slowly phasing it out, right, in lieu of Karma, the replacement. But this is where you would create and establish your mantra settings. Gosh, I just can't decide what to say with that. I'm gonna go with mantra. You can establish your mantra settings, right? Your ray samples and all the different things that go into the final image. We will also not be using this, which is crazy because I've used this for the majority of my time in Houdini. But times change and we got to change with them. There is also the shop context. Speaking of yesteryear, this was replaced with the mat context. Now, my understanding is they still left this in here because people still have workflows and can design some really cool shaders inside of this context. I've never actually explored it because by the time I started getting into Houdini, mat was already kind of the dominant force there. And you can do all the work that you needed in here. So just be aware, shop is that context. We also will not be touching on that. We've got I'm going to skip stage because I'm going to go back to that one, but the task context, also known as TOPS, task operators. This is where you can generate work items. Now, that may make no sense to you at all, and that's fair, because it is kind of a confusing concept. But inside of a TopNet, a task operator network, what you can do essentially, at least the only real use cases I've used it for is something called wedging. But what the heck does that mean? Well, wedging is basically taking multiple values for a parameter. Let's say how sticky a liquid is, for example. We got a stickiness of 1, a stickiness of 10, and a stickiness of 100. And I want to see the results from all of those. Now, I can choose to, one by one, input those parameters and then see how it looks. Or I can use task operators to let it know I want to try all 3 and allow that to generate work items that will iterate through each of those parameter values. Now, that is the most simple version of a task operator structure. So I don't want to get too into the weeds there, but we will be using task operators to some degree over the duration of this course. So we will revisit these concepts. The last context I want to look at is the stage context. It's also known as Solaris, right? Solaris is Houdini's answer to USD workflow. Now, what is USD? USD is Universal Scene Description. It is a file type, just like an OBJ or an FBX or a .abc, an Alembic file, right? It is a way of storing not only geometry, like those structures, but you can also store a whole lot more: cameras, materials, lighting, the universal scene. It is a description of the universal scene. The promise of this is the idea of sharing these USD files between softwares as well. So everything is speaking the same language. Don't worry about what that means in the larger scale. What I want you to take away from what the stage or Solaris context is this is your context for bringing in any aspects of your geometry, lighting, or cameras from the OBJ context, bring them over here and prepare them for render. So typically my workflow is do all the geometry work and camera operation work in the OBJ level, import that into the stage or Solaris context, and then prepare it with lighting and materials and do all the final aspects in this context for render. I know that's a lot. It's a lot to go over. So just to hone focus a little bit here, the main ones we will be using are the OBJ context and the stage context. Those will be the two that we bounce between the most. Okay, and as a final stop on this whirlwind tour of UI, I want to take a look at some of these helpful toggles that exist inside of the network view. Because we're talking about organization, right? In the previous video, boxes for organization. But your workflow should also be organized visually. It's very helpful. It's very helpful specifically when revisiting past projects, or by passing on a project to somebody else, they're able to more easily identify what it is that's going on. And there's only a few things I want to cover here. Inside of this, the OBJ context, we have our sphere, and it is displayed as just a white box node. If we create a light, for example, you'll notice not only is the shape different, shape of a light bulb, very clever, but it's also yellow by default. If we create a camera, we can see it's, again, a different shape and a different color. Well, these are defaults that Houdini have set up in order to, illustrate more easily when you're looking from far away what's what. But we have total flexibility over the customization of all of these things, and it's very, very easy to do. If you're in the network view, you can press C for the color palette pop-up, and you can just click and drag to expand or shrink that color palette. And now, when I highlight a node and I click a color, it becomes that color, right? In this way, we can design our very own color coding system, or maybe the studio you're working at has a color coding system that just makes everything from a macro perspective a little easier to understand. The same is true by hitting Z. You get these shape pop-ups, and now I can choose whatever shape I want. You'll start to see over the duration of this course that I have a very specific way of organizing these things, and you may love it or you may hate it. So feel free to change it if it's not your cup of tea, but it works for me, so I'm into it. Either way, we can just reset this very easily back to white and a box. I know I said I was going to talk about the buttons. I just want to show you this one shortcut real quick. If you highlight all the nodes that you want to order a little bit more, hold A, click and drag to the right or left, you'll see it drew them into a straight line. If I hold A and click and drag down, it will order them in a straight line top to bottom. So you can go left, right, you can go top to bottom, and you can do that for any of them. Whatever one you're dragging on, you can use that as the anchor, so to speak, for your organization. I'm going to undo that so that it's a little more chaotic. I'll even drag these around. You can also hit L in your scene, and what it will try to do is order your nodes in a helpful way. This is hit or miss, right? This is a dangerous toggle because it could jack up your entire aesthetic and make your entire network view very, very confusing very quick. So, better to organize it yourself. I'm going to put all these back. I'm going to hit C to collapse that color palette there and head back over to the toggles at the top of this window. The next one I want to do is create network box. You can hit Shift O to do that, or you can just click the button. If you highlight nodes and you click this, it will create a box around it that you can click and drag and expand. If you click on that box, hit color, you can also color code the box as well. By double clicking this right here, you can then name it box or geometry or lighting or whatever you want in order to keep it structured. And now by clicking this minimize button and plus button, we can expand and contract that. Again, further control over the visuals that we're seeing in our network view. The last one I want to look at in here is the sticky note. I use it all the time. If you click that button for the sticky note, you get a floating sticky note pop-up. This too, if you click on it, you can change the color. And then if you click inside of it, you can leave a note here. For a future artist, if there is something that they need to know, you can attach a sticky note for some helpful information. You can also right-click on this and choose how big you want that to be. I use these all the time for all sorts of reasons, especially when I'm leaving the project for a day. I mark it in red and I say, re-render this in the morning or something like that. Just so I know exactly what my task is for that day, right when I get started. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this other helpful toggle here. You'll see it at the top of a lot of these different display windows, right? This question mark. This opens up access to the Houdini help, which you can access in other ways, and we will look at that. But the Houdini help is unmatched in the 3D world as far as thorough documentation. It is rich with sweet, helpful information that will change your life. I was never one to look at documentation until getting into Houdini, and I'm a changed man. I'm not going back. You can't make me. But just to show you an example of this, if I head into the sphere itself, and then I create, let's say, I create a mountain node. A mountain node will basically, I'm also going to turn off the lighting here. In fact, I'm going to delete the lighting. Let's just get rid of that. I create a mountain node. A mountain node will basically displace each point along a noise pattern, give you something that is, mountainous, I suppose, in a way. But if you ever have any questions about the mountain node itself, and you're like, how does it work, or what do these parameters really mean? If you hover over the parameter, it will give you a breakdown of what that parameter is and what it does. Sometimes it doesn't, though. It doesn't bat 100%, but it's really, really impressive. It's batting average. If we head over to here, though, and click for help, what this will do, will open up a little pop-up window for us here that we can go ahead and expand, and then it will populate with the attribute noise geometry, which if you look over here, the mountain, I guess that's a slang term for it, because right here we have the real name, attribute noise. The attribute noise geometry node, and it will give you tips, it will give you an overview, and it will give you an understanding of every single parameter that exists in it. I mean, look at the detail. This is the Sistine Chapel of help documentation. It is incredible. So if you are ever lost, ever confused, ever alone in the wilderness with no one to call Houdini help. Not literally, again, just, this documentation. Don't be weird, don't be literal like that. So know that that is there. And we will be looking at the Houdini help moving forward, actually quite a bit in this next section, because there is no topic where Houdini help is more helpful than what we're about to discuss next.